regular town council meeting of the town of Garrett Park. It's Monday, December 9. I would like to call the meeting to order and begin by reading into the record a statement for the record with respect to a closed meeting held on Tuesday, November 12, 2024. The statement is as follows. On November 12, 2024, the mayor and town council met in open session. Present were Mayor Keller and council members Jerry Lee Bennett, Phil Schulp, and Stephen Paskowski. Town manager Barb Matthews and assistant town manager Caleb Bucher were also in attendance. At 6:41 p.m., council member Schulp moved to go into closed session pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Articles 3-305B7 to consult with council to obtain legal advice regarding infrastructure in town. Councilmember Bennett seconded the motion, which carried unanimously. Also present for the closed session were James Auslander, Esquire, and Gus Bauman, Esquire. Councilmember Eisenstadt joined the closed meeting at 6:48 p.m. The mayor and town council obtained legal advice regarding stormwater management. During the closed session, the town council authorized Beveridge and Diamond PC to prepare for the mayor and town council review a letter for submission to the office of the county attorney regarding stormwater management within Garrett Park. No other actions were taken. That ends the reading of the statement for the record. I'm sorry, I omitted one thing. The closed meeting adjourned at 7:34 p.m. That ends the statement for the record. So we will now move to this evening's meeting. And before I ask for approval of the agenda as circulated, I will ask if there are any council members who wish to move from the consent agenda to the regular agenda, any matter that would have the effect of making it available for discussion.
Yeah. Let's see. No, hang on a sec. Apologize. I had some questions regarding the third-party IT security assessment and the Penn Place fire alarm. So, a couple questions on those. The rest of it I'm fine with.
All right, we'll move that to
I want to move two things, right?
oh, you moved both of the contract authorizations?
Yes. Just
All right.
so we get
We will create a new category of action items following the town manager's report. And we will move those two items to action.
If I could please ask everyone to make sure we're speaking into the microphones for the benefits of folks at home.
Okay. Is it registering?
If I could get a check from Jerry Lee, please. Can you hear us?
I can hear Chris just fine. It's a little harder to hear Phil, Councilmember Schulp.
Okay.
That lady with the picture on the screen complaining?
No.
No
she
one has
did?
submitted a complaint. We just know that it sometimes is easy to be quiet when we don't see anyone in the audience to project
Right.
to.
Kayla, I'm having trouble hearing Phil as well.
I had asked that we move two items, specifically, I had questions about the IT, and I had questions about the fire alarm replacement. I think they're pretty simple, but nevertheless, it's probably best that we move them in case anybody else has any questions.
All right. And as a matter of administrative discretion of the presiding officer, I'm moving those to a new action category. And that leaves three items in the consent agenda. With those changes, do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as just modified?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
So we have three items on the consent agenda. Two uh, meeting minutes and a committee appointment. Do I hear a motion to approve, to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Are there any presentations by residents? Either from those many assembled before us or on Zoom? All right, hearing none, we will move to the town manager's report, including the financial report. Barb?
Just a second. Included in your agenda packet is the financial report for November. Really not much to write home about. The only item I did just want to briefly address is account 2.2, which is revenues from local income taxes. You probably noticed that there was a fairly sharp difference between receipts at this time last year compared to this year. I just wanted to reassure you that that was expected and was taken into account in the development of the FY 2025 budget. As you may recall, we've talked about this quite a bit. During the pandemic, there were extensions in filing deadlines and also a lack of enforcement. And last year at this time, we got a payment of roughly $430,000 in the month of November, which exceeded total fiscal year receipts for many years. So the difference between last year and this year at the end of November was that significant one-time payment that we got last November. Included in your agenda packet is just an update on the activities of the maintenance team. As you'll note, they've been sort of wrapping up warm weather related work, specifically mowing and doing some watering, and are now switching their attention to readying our snow removal equipment and winterizing equipment, as well as some of our buildings. Also just wanted to briefly touch on the Maryland Time to Care Act. This was legislation that was adopted in 2022. It establishes paid family and medical leave for workers in Maryland. Part of that legislation does provide for a statewide paid leave program, and the Maryland Department of Labor has been slowly rolling out proposed regulations and their program structure for the family and medical leave insurance program. They've been offering a lot of opportunities for employers to offer input and kind of learn how everything's going to work. Kayla has been our representative attending those Maryland Department of Labor meetings over the past 18 months. And just wanted to give you sort of a heads up that we will have an agenda item at your January meeting, during which Kayla will brief you a little bit more on that legislation and what we can expect. And so just didn't want you caught off guard when you see that on the January agenda. The last item I had was just, and I'm going to turn it over to Kayla momentarily. As you all likely recall, earlier this fall, we did have a community survey, which followed a community meeting that we had back in September. The goal of the community preferences survey was to give residents who couldn't attend the community meeting the opportunity to offer input on the desired park elements as we begin the design process for Yandell Park. We received a total of 109 responses. Of these, 90 were submitted by people we know to be Garrett Park residents. 17 were from individuals who declined to provide a name or address that allowed Kayla to verify their residency status, and 2 who did give addresses we know live outside the city. With that introduction, Kayla, I'm going to turn it over to you if you could sort of provide some highlights of the survey responses.
I appreciate that very much. The Mayor and Town Council will have seen this information a few weeks ago when it was shared with you all via email. You'll have noticed that of the responses, we did try and keep them separated and segregated based upon what we could verify. We did not include folks' name and address, but we did include unedited, open-ended responses that they provided. You'll note that these responses have multiple tags in various colors, trying to sort through all the data to determine kind of what trends we might be seeing. Those categorizations had to be done manually based on the SurveyMonkey platform that we have. If there are particular combinations of responses that you want to see, I am happy to start pulling that information together for you all. You just have to let me know what you'd like to see together. I am very pleased with the level of response that we got from folks. You'll notice several people offered robust comments ranging on a variety of topics of what might be of interest to them at the former Yundell property site. We saw everything from folks saying that they want to make sure that there is adequate seating available for them to enjoy whatever amenities are added to the park. Some folks had more distinct suggestions. Those range from having a public chess table put in to potentially adult exercise equipment. There are several who called for a water feature. Nature play seemed to captivate a decent portion of the responses. There was no clear-cut head and shoulders winner in the open-ended response, but we did not expect for there to be one. This information was all turned over to Norton Land Design for the use in their creation of 3 concepts designs. As council and the mayor may recall from my email, that community meeting is scheduled for January 22nd, where we'll be presenting the 3 concept designs that Norton has come up with, and that hopefully reflect some of the guiding themes that you see in these responses from individuals.
Kayla, did Parks and Open Space get a copy of all of this?
Parks and Open Space has seen
Great.
all the responses.
And we did discuss it during the meeting. I would have figured we would, did you receive anything from Parks and Open Space?
I did get a few questions from various members of Parks and Open Space. Unfortunately, the day that question came in, I was tangled up in meetings, including stuff about the Time to Care Act. But I did my best to answer those questions. They wanted to make sure they understood what was going on with the 17 responses that were labeled as unverifiable. They also wanted some clarity about how the tags came in and kind of what could be done with the tags. So did my best to answer that. They have not come back to my knowledge with any further questions. Town Manager Matthews, have they reached out to you with further questions?
No, they have not.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say I'm always just an email or a phone call away. So if there are questions that you, POSCO, or community members at large have, I'm happy to answer them.
What time is the meeting on the 22nd of January, please?
Barb, am I correct that that's 7 p.m.?
I don't think I've seen the agenda for their meeting, but I think they typically meet at 7.
Okay.
It's
So-
going to vary between 7 and 7:30.
And it's gonna be where? Here?
Here.
Yes.
I have it at 7. It's Norton.
That is correct. So I don't have anything further that I want to highlight. You're all welcome to consider the responses at your leisure. And I know I've said it, but it bears repeating. If there's any particular combination of tags or trends that you want me to consider in combination so that you can look at it together, please let me know and I'm happy to do that.
Are we still in the town manager's report? We are, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Have some questions, but
Well, I finished everything I need to say. So Town Manager Matthews, I think you have some questions from Councilmember Eisenstadt.
okay, yes, thank you. It's just really related to the ARPA funding not yet obligated, which I didn't see in a broken out addition for this month, but I did see it in last month, right? The 119,000 that is not yet obligated. And as I recall, it has to be obligated by the end of this calendar year. So I guess I just wanted to see where those plans are.
Well, some of that will depend on one of the items that is on your agenda that got moved off consent. That would be the fire alarm system. That is an ARPA-funded project. So obviously, if you approve that contract authorization, that will, obligate about $43,000. The issue that we're still working on would be the Waverly sidewalk lighting. As I mentioned in the transmittal of the agenda packet to you, Traffic Systems primary supplier does not carry either of the 2 product lines that you all have expressed interest in. They have moved on to an alternative supplier, their secondary supplier. Obviously, there was very little time between your meeting on the 12th and the Thanksgiving holiday. My understanding is that the secondary supplier is working on the requested information, which was pricing for the various pole and lamp options that you all specified at your November meeting. In the event that we do not have firm pricing, which is a possibility, we only have roughly a week before the agenda packet for your December 12th, I'm sorry, not December 12th, your December 18th special town council meeting. As I've shared with Mayor Keller, and I've talked to the town attorney, my plan at that point then is to pivot to bringing forward a not to exceed contract with Traffic Systems, with a not to exceed amount equivalent to the unobligated ARPA funds, and having a general project description of the purchase of poles and lamps, installation of concrete bases, associated electrical work, and the town attorney was comfortable with that.
Great. Thank you.
So you've got 100% of the ARPA funds obligated before the end of December of this year,
They will be, they're not yet.
but they will be.
Basically, obligation means that we have to have a signed purchase order or a signed contract. So, as I indicated, my plan is to see what I get this week. I did send an email to Traffic Systems this morning, asking if they'd heard anything else from their secondary supplier. They answered another email on a different topic, but not that one. So we'll see where they're at. They do have a copy of our general contract template that I shared with them. So I'll probably go ahead, depending on where things stand towards the end of this week, go ahead and try to have the contract language put together, kind of assuming the worst case scenario that I don't have a precise number of poles and lamps, just so they can just look at it in its entirety, because I just want to make sure that contract is signed before people start leaving for the Christmas and New Year's holiday.
Okay.
But we should be in good shape. We just still have a little bit of work to do.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anything further on the town manager report, including the Yandell survey results? I would just observe that although open-ended comments were diverse, there were certainly themes. And on the 4 specific questions, there was certainly as close as you're going to get to unanimity on anything in this town with respect to nature play, which was indicated by 86% favorable, 14% neutral, and 0 registered any negative with respect to that element at least.
And that
Alright.
is looking at the folks who did not provide verifiable information about their address, the 86%. Nature Play, if you look at the folks who did provide addresses, 55-ish% seems to like it, but we do have a few folks who did not like the idea of Nature Play and who provided names and address.
Mhm.
So we can obviously look at things as a composite, but you are correct. We are as close to consensus.
Because we're ever gonna get-
It seems that that the top areas are not incompatible, right? I mean, it seems that, in fact, many plans could be drawn that could serve multiple purposes, if not all of them.
And that is the hope and why we've engaged Norton Land Design to help us pull together a design that hopefully touches on many of those things.
But you said they're pulling together 3 designs. And
So
what
three
are the-
three concept designs. Mayor Keller, Town Manager Matthews, and I have an upcoming check-in meeting about those concepts. But as a reminder, those concepts are being presented publicly on January 22nd
Right.
at that community meeting.
What will be the distinction between the 3 designs? I mean, is there something different requested of each one? Or is it just up to Norton to sort of offer 3 views of sort of fulfilling all of these objectives?
So I don't believe Town Manager Matthews, Mayor Keller, or I have at any point told Norton that we want to see certain things prescribed. Part of the reason we did the survey and turned it over to Norton was so they could see the full range of what Garrett Park residents are intrigued by, what they don't feel any affinity towards. But part of why you hired a firm is for them to use their professional expertise to consider the restrictions and the opportunities of the conservation easement, as well as to consider what knowledge they've gained having taken multiple projects through Montgomery County
And our
mandatory
bu-
referral
And our budget limitation.
and our budget limitations.
Yeah.
So
Okay. It's almost, it's very common to do that, to get multiple concepts, but it's almost every time 0 of those concepts goes through unchanged. It's almost always a hybrid of certain things. There might be strong resonation with parts of A and parts of B and none of C, or some combination like that, where eventually that first meeting kind of leads towards gelling of ideas that seem the most compatible or getting the most resonance.
well, we have something to look forward to on January 22nd and following as we see what gels and what doesn't.
All right, anything further on town manager report related? So we will move to an action item, and to get this on the table for consideration and without prejudging any ultimate outcome, I will entertain a motion to approve the contract with ISM LLC for third-party IT security assessment in the amount of $18,000.
So moved. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think Phil has some comments.
Okay,
Oh, I have comments, but I think
Well,
you just want to
it-
put it on the table.
Yeah.
it's been moved and seconded, so we will now ask for discussion.
So I just have a couple of questions. Looking at this, and I'm wondering, do we need to have any type of contingency? Because basically part of this says that we're supposed to undergo this security assessment, after which we have to correct any faults or failures. So I'm assuming that the quote is just for the required assessment. And I'm wondering if we need to add any money for a second assessment, reassessment, whatever, if we've got faults or failures that need to be corrected.
It's a great question, Phil. So yeah, the 18,000 is just for the security assessment. The actual contract will have some hourly rates if we need to consult with them in terms of other things, because part of, as you might recall from the budget process, is we will be moving to the cloud. The reason that I'm bringing this forward now is we wanted to have the security assessment done, not only for state legal compliance, but also just to see if there's some things in the configuration as we do certain things going forward. You could certainly add something in if you wanted to provide some funding, or you could view this as two separate contracts, kind of two separate actions. One is just to approve the assessment. I think the funding for the hourly work would undoubtedly come under $10,000. So I think when I was bringing this forward, I considered that as sort of on an as-needed basis, and it would fall under your threshold. But if you want to go ahead and consider them together in some way, that's certainly fine too, and I can address that specifically in the contract structure.
So considering the fact, and I address this to Mayor Keller and others, considering the fact we just put something out there to authorize the contract of 18,000, should we do this as a separate contingency for, say, $10,000? Or do we want to consider them together, or what do you think is the best method?
Well, the motion had a specific dollar amount. Barb, is it the gravamen of what you've indicated that we need some flexibility for potential additional hourly?
I think that would be helpful, Chris. Certainly I don't want to suggest to the firm itself that, they can run up hourly charges, but I think we did budget for both the assessment as well as some anticipated hourly work. So if you want to basically go ahead, and perhaps the motion could be something to the effect of having $18,000 for the assessment, and I think per Phil's suggestion, some not to exceed amount or any additional hourly work that the town in its discretion might choose to avail itself of. That would probably take care of it. It is,
So,
both of those are covered budgetarily.
so what would you think? You had earlier said like 10 grand, but can we lower that, or is there, what do you think?
I think you could probably, I mean, I think probably maybe 5,000,
That
not
works.
to exceed.
Don't we also have the option to just get the report and then kind of see what's required and then go from there?
Yeah, one of the things I would just share is, and I think to be clear, I did want to just, you know, there is mention in some of what ISM does in terms of like penetration testing and things like that. In this case, it's more sort of following, if anyone is familiar with like NIST standards or kind of industry standards for cybersecurity. Typically, you don't report out on any weaknesses in a public forum, for obvious reasons. There is one of the provisions in state law that if you did want some kind of briefing on what the report found, that can be done in closed session. There's a specific provision for closing a meeting for cybersecurity reasons. So I did want to, ISM is going to be kind of following the NIST framework and sort of checking to see what we comply with and what we don't, if that makes sense.
I think somebody should know what the, you know, areas are that they found that need to be addressed. And either the mayor or council should be briefed on that in a closed session. I just
Yeah.
think we should be knowing what it is that they
Yeah,
find.
we can certainly do that. I just wanted to flag that would not occur in a public setting for obvious reasons.
Sure. So could I amend my motion, or do I?
Certainly.
So,
Something in the order of a not to exceed 25,000.
5,000.
Five. So
Well,
not to
but-
exceed is, so it'd be a not to exceed 23,000, right?
Well, call it 25.
Okay,
I think
25 works for me.
This will come out of budget line 11.7. Is that correct, Barb?
That's correct.
Yeah. You can do as you choose. I would just suggest 25 to allow, you know, if we don't spend it, there's no harm.
Right. No, I'm fine with that because I'm trying to make it flexible as possible so we can get the work done and not have to come back or make any other notices or changes, whatever.
All right. Todd,
So,
I believe you seconded. Is that amenable to you?
Yes.
Is there further discussion?
Just another question. I assume this includes them looking in our email system, but would that be correct? It's like every once in a while I'll get a phishing email.
Yes. They'll also look at the website, basically anything that would provide an entry into any town system.
Any further discussion?
So Barb, you'll set up a closed session for us to know what the liabilities or the weaknesses are in the system? and what-
Yes, once they've submitted their report, we can get that scheduled.
Great. Thank you.
Anything further? I'll call the question. All in favor of awarding the contract and allowing a not to exceed $25,000 expenditure, indicate by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right.
Jerry Lee, did you?
I just didn't get there fast enough.
Okay. Didn't want to exclude you.
Oops, so the Penn Place fire alarm system replacement, this would come out of ARPA funds, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And again, to get the matter on the table for discussion, I will entertain a motion to award the contract in the amount of $42,155 to EAI Security Systems. Do I hear a motion?
I move that we offer $42,155 to EAI systems to provide the security systems needed for Penn Place
Yeah.
fire alarm system.
I'll second it.
All right, now, discussion, questions about this?
I
Contract.
have a couple of questions. So the first one is, what about town hall? We can do anything with this building?
I think if we were to do anything, Phil, that would likely be done as part of the renovation. We focused on Penn Place specifically, just because of the number of false alarms we've had at the building.
Okay, so this building's okay. You feel it's okay until it's time to be renovated or worked on?
Yes.
Okay. Second question, any thought of purchasing any spare parts, smoke alarms, other equipment, in case of failure?
I think if there were a failure, we'd probably just call EAI to come back out and replace those sensors, because that's not something we would be well equipped to do.
This kind of equipment, it lasts for, it seems like about 20-ish years, and then
Yes.
the companies, they kind of support it that long, and then eventually they come out with new lines of panels and they stop supporting the ones that are prior. So I see this cycle all the time with hotels where it's 20-ish years and it's time to move on. But usually those currently supported items are easy to get. So.
Yeah, I think you're right, Stephen. I think the system's about 20 years old. I think what we have found is that we're just having sensor failures and we can't get new parts anymore.
Okay,
Okay, I have a couple more here.
sure. Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. No, no, they're good
Okay.
questions. They're good questions. Good.
Having dealt with lots of obsolescence, that's what I do for a job, or a big part of it.
We all do that.
So
I rode a train with new seats the other day.
So what I was wondering, why not a new graphic display? Because if the original's 20 years old, it would seem that we may not be able to repair it at some point in the future.
I'm going to be honest, Phil, this is not my area of expertise. I'm not sure what you mean by a new graphic display.
Well, it's said in I was looking at the I was looking at the bid that's on the backside of
Mm-hmm.
the thing you provided us. and
Yes.
it said that they were going to, the graphic part of the enunciator will remain to be reused. So I'm taking that.
It's usually a floor plan that
Yeah,
goes on
it-
the enunciator, so the building hasn't changed, it still
Yeah.
applies. I mean, it could look like a different style, but the main panel really runs, and then the enunciator is where you would see what's happening that's going to the main panel.
Okay, so the graphic part of the enunciator is just that
It's like a floor plan.
floor plan,
Yeah.
building drawing thing. Okay, that makes perfect sense. The next question I had was, I assume is part of the final inspection in Montgomery County, they'll do a post-test of all the installed equipment to verify it all works.
Yes, that's correct.
And will we have any updates as far as, will we be able to look at this remotely? So if there's an alarm, town staff can look to see what it actually is rather than having to come over to the building?
Not that I am aware of. I can ask about that. Usually the fire department is automatically called out. So normally we have a staff person report in too.
Okay, so, but it really wouldn't be of much value then, we could say.
Yeah, it's wired in. I mean, basically there's a notification if the system goes off, and then basically the fire department automatically responds.
Okay, fair enough. And the last thing I saw was we have to have the elevator contractor on site when replacing the modules. Do we
Mhm.
need to add any funds for paying the elevator company?
It wouldn't be a bad idea. They basically charge by the hour. And it's sort of the reverse too when we have the elevator inspections. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have a good figure for what the elevator company will charge. It's probably no more than 5 hours and probably much less than that. and they charge, to look up and see what they charge, but yeah, maybe add a couple $1,000 just in case that's needed.
Town
I'm worried
Manager
that once they
Matthews.
see
I-
that, they're
Yes,
gonna
Kayla?
magically charge that
Yeah,
amount. so.
and,
Okay.
and this is this is coming from ARPA funds. I suggest we stick with the finite amount quoted here. And I think Barb always has the discretion to call in our elevator people and
Yeah.
we just find another operating line item to take that out of.
Okay, as long as you got it covered, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure.
It
I appreciate that,
introduces-
Phil.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm all set. Thank you.
all right. Anything further in the way of discussion? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the contract to EAI Security Systems in the amount of $42,155. I'm sorry, we've already had
You
the
already
motion.
did the
I'm
motion.
calling for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
I was an aye.
Good. Now, that's the two action items. We're actually still pretty much on schedule. Unfinished business. The updating of Garrett Park's fines and penalties. Kayla has done a quite detailed memorandum, and there are various attachments. I was looking at one attachment online, which didn't require enlargement, but in hard copy it did. So you have an enlargement of that if you need it. Kayla?
All right. If you cast your mind back to January of this year, you might recall a presentation where Town Manager Matthews and I went through multiple fines and penalties that the town currently has on the books. We did this because General Code, which is the firm retained by the town to assist with our review and update of the town code, noticed some inconsistencies and had asked us how we wanted to proceed. As you may recall, we have the discretion to establish both civil infractions, sometimes referred to as municipal infractions, as well as establish misdemeanors. Looking at the state limits, the town may choose to impose a maximum fine of $1,000, imprisonment for up to 6 months, or both for a misdemeanor penalty. For a civil infraction per state law, you may have a maximum fine of $1,000. As you are all well aware, just because the state says that we have a maximum does not mean we actually need to have everything set to the maximum. In that January 8th meeting, those seated present and former Mayor Joanna Welch went through and talked about how they felt various code violations should be categorized. If you look at attachment 1, which is also the oversized document that was sitting at your place tonight, you'll see that there's a middle column titled Town Council Assigned Tier. You all classified this on a scale from 1, which was least severe, to 3, which was most severe. These were then used to kind of help guide staff as we considered other municipal codes, fines and penalties, and started making recommendations.
Have we had any incidents where we needed to do any of these things in Garrett Park for the last 5 or 10 years?
I am unaware of any that have happened in the last 5 or 10 years. Town Manager Matthews, are you aware of any incidents in the past few years?
I'm not, Lisa, during my tenure, so I've been here just a few days over 3 years, and we have not taken anyone to court during that
Who
time.
enforces this anyway? Whose job would that be? The town manager?
You could designate the town manager as the code enforcement officer. A lot of municipalities find that it's more practical to hire someone to serve as that role exclusively. I can tell you, I have done a limited amount of code enforcement in Pennsylvania. To do it properly is somewhat time consuming, and Town Manager Matthews has a significant volume of other projects on her plate.
Yeah.
I would not recommend designating the town manager as the code enforcement officer. If that is something of interest for the council, staff can start looking at options. There are firms that at times specialize in doing code enforcement, or we could look at having a different staff member doing it. But
So we
I-
wouldn't incur a cost until there was an infraction, I assume.
So that is not necessarily 100% true. If the town council were interested in retaining an individual or firm to exclusively handle code enforcement, we would obviously have to compensate them for their time as they become familiar with the town's code provisions, what constitutes a violation. We also incur costs of getting set up with the appropriate equipment. We would also potentially incur costs for certified mail when we have to actually provide the notification of violation of the code. So
Do we have a line item for any of that in our
Mhm.
budget?
we do not, to my knowledge, have a dedicated line item for that. Town Manager Matthews, is there a line item that you think this would fall under?
If we were to contract with a firm, then it would be under professional fees. If we were to hire a part-time employee, then it would be under the personnel cost.
Yes.
We looked at this before the pandemic and up right into the pandemic, whether or not to hire somebody to look for parking infractions. I guess mostly, I don't know if they could do moving infractions. From recollection, maybe you remember, Phil, I think it was like 30,000 was budgeted, and we considered, my recollection is maybe like cutting that to 15, but then I and others suggested, we were in the midst of the pandemic, that you weren't going to have an overrun of parking fines by the train station, so that was pushed off.
Mhm.
But since then, there's been nobody really to enforce, like parking over term at the
Mhm.
at that lot, or parking in fire zones around town, and so on and so forth. Having commercial vehicles on the street.
Yes.
A lot of the things that are in the ordinance.
Yeah, I
So
recall the same.
I appreciate that reminder of kind of the process that led to council. What's currently before you tonight isn't really focused on the enforcement aspect. When Town Manager Matthews and I were reviewing what we wanted to bring forward tonight, we thought it was more prudent to bring forward potential revisions to the fines and penalties. That way, whatever method of enforcement council wishes staff to pursue, we have kind of our ducks in a row for what they're actually enforcing.
This list, as I'm looking at it, doesn't have anything to do with parking or speeding or anything to do
That's a
with.
little bit.
No, there is a mention, section 803, parking of commercial vehicles. However, you are correct, it is not predominantly about parking.
Do we have some? an
Number
ordinance?
8, what did you say, 803?
Section 803.
Yes, it's there. Do we have an ordinance about parking in fire zones? I don't see that.
I'm not sure that we do. I think we intended to
803.
add that, and then the
Yes.
same with parking time limits, but
Yeah. Kayla, may I jump in? If I may?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we might have had some brief discussion about this within kind of tangentially in the last couple months, but as I had mentioned, whatever meeting it was, there is a separate schedule of fines that are not classified as municipal infractions. And those were set up by regulation. I don't remember the context in which this discussion took place, and I apologize for that, but I had shared with you at the time that the method by which those parking-related fines were structured may be problematic. So we can discuss this at a future meeting. But there is something specifically about parking near a fire hydrant and things like that.
But
Oftentimes,
nobody's enforcing
think-
those now, right?
I'm sorry?
Is anyone enforcing those parking?
No, I think to Stephen's structure, this was after I joined the town staff, but he and Phil are remembering correctly, the town was on the verge of hiring someone to do parking enforcement. The pandemic hit. The town did not move forward with hiring someone, and there is not a staff person who can enforce that. Typically, parking within a certain distance of a fire hydrant and a fire, like an intersection or things like that, would generally be enforced by a police department. And I believe if someone was parking too close to a fire hydrant, we could probably call the Montgomery County Police Department and ask that they send someone out to actually write a ticket.
again, so just to be clear, you said that these are not part of municipal code. Which I guess.
So no, I
Town
think,
code or what?
so to be clear, we did not create these penalties for violations of the town's code.
Understood. But
These
I'm
were
talking
existing.
About parking here specifically.
Okay.
I was just asking where, you said, Barbara, that those are not part of the town code. So my question. is,
No,
what are they part of?
yeah, I apologize, Todd, if I wasn't clear. They are not generally considered a municipal infraction that, for example, would be subject to $1,000 penalty. They certainly are violations and certainly can be written up, but typically I don't believe they're considered municipal infractions, at least not in our code.
But we could consider them that way.
That's certainly something we can explore if that's what you all would like to do.
To do that, you'd have to introduce an ordinance.
Yes.
Our parking restrictions and traffic restrictions, such as the one-way at certain hours on Oxford, were all individual ordinances, with everything that implies in terms of the cumbersomeness of getting them on the books, off the books, or changing them every time the elementary school operating hours changed.
But we don't have any enforcement mechanism.
No,
Right.
well, there wasn't an enforcement mechanism, but there could have been because they were ordinances.
Right.
That was removed to a set of regulations. I think the policy underlying the rescinding of those as ordinances was warranted. It's very cumbersome to have them as individual ordinances. One way on Raleigh, stuff like that. You may wish to, at some future date, refine that further. I would hope it would be in a manner that wouldn't require us reestablishing them as individual ordinances. But for purposes of tonight's discussion, I think the salient point is that traffic and parking are not currently separate ordinances.
Kayla, why after 602 down to 603, 606, 607, there's no ranking at all and no fine?
That's fine.
So,
There is.
yes.
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
proposed
it.
amendment.
Oh,
Okay.
We went over all of these. with
Okay.
Joanna, remember that?
Yeah.
Yes. So the ones that you pointed out
Right.
from section
They're all
602 onwards,
1,000. Okay.
they're all misdemeanors
I
and
got
they're
it.
all set at the state law maximum.
Okay.
So circling back to the tier system that council established back in January, staff's recommending that a tier 1 municipal infraction, also called a civil infraction, have a $100 fine for a first offense. We are also recommending that if a violation is repeated within 12 months following the first violation, that there be an escalation to a fine of $250. As you may recall from that January meeting, and as you can see in attachment 1 on the table, the tier 1 offenses have a mixed bag of current fines amount. We have a $25 littering fine up to a $100 fine for single-use plastics. So for consistency's sake, because these are all assigned to tier 1, we're recommending $100 as the fine for a first offense, escalation to $250 for each repeat offense within a 12-month period following the first. Is that a fine amount, an escalation amount that council is comfortable with? Would you prefer to see it raised or would you prefer to see it lower, or
Didn't we make recommendations on this
you did not?
at all?
No. Council at that time chose to assign it to tiers, asked staff to go and do research on other municipal codes and how they handle fines and penalties, and to bring back
Okay.
some refinement.
So you're asking us to approve these levels of
I'm asking for,
infractions, but no mechanism to enforce or collect. Is that right?
enforcement is going to be handled as a separate matter. For now, we're trying to kind of clean house so that when we
It's
do,
on the books.
so we have things cleaned up and ready for someone to enforce, whoever that someone may be. So
Or not. depending on what we want to do.
And your proposed fines seem consistent with the neighboring jurisdictions, right?
They
very
seem consistent. We didn't want to be the tall daisy standing out with overly harsh punitive fines, but we also recognize that these are meant to be deterrents to repeated behavior that town council and the mayor find not beneficial.
Right.
So kind of thumbs up, thumbs down for tier one. Does that seem appropriate?
Yes.
Sure. Do we need a motion?
No,
N-
I have a threshold question. How, for the, I believe there's in a long-term project, the notion that we will revisit the entire code in terms of just rationalizing it top to bottom. Could this await that effort, or would we do this as a separate undertaking, which would in essence be a motion to amend each of these provisions in the fashion reflected in your spreadsheet?
I'm going to tap in Town Manager Matthews after I say, I think it's going to be easier for everyone to wrap their arms around what we're trying to do if we approach this with a more narrow focus rather than wait for a more holistic
Okay,
rationalization. These codes are at times incredibly dense. So to borrow a phrase from some elders in my family, the way you eat a whale is bite by bite. This is bite one.
no. So as a, Jerry, you have a question?
I just wanted to comment that I appreciate that the town staff put in the $1,000 proposed fine for preservation of trees and shrubbery. And I feel bad that somehow we allowed that to be assigned to tier 2, because I do agree it should be in the top tier. And I also support the proposal to even put it above the top tier as you have listed here, because you have the top tier at first offense 500 and then 1,000 thereafter. And I think in terms of protecting our arboretum trees, starting with the $1,000 fine is the right way to go. So I just wanted to make that statement.
Thank you, Councilmember Bennett. For those of you who are looking at the spreadsheet, she's referring to section 716, preservation of trees and shrubbery. That's currently classified as a municipal infraction, tier 2. The current penalty is $50.
A question about that one too, like, I assume we're gonna have some sort of a definition of what that means to not preserve trees and shrubbery, like, it's different if you drive a truck into the trunk versus if you know, maybe
Yeah,
knock
if-
off one branch by accident. Like, what are we gonna do to make that reasonable enough that it'll stick, and
If,
such
if,
fines will be paid?
oops, sorry.
Okay.
Kayla, if I can jump in. So I have been working with the Arboretum Committee and our consulting arborist Phil Normandy on some updating of portions of Chapter 7 of the code to accomplish a number of things. One is the very issue, Stephen, that that you have raised, is to clarify in the code what actually constitutes a violation, and to also kind of modernize our procedures. For example, right now, the way the code reads, someone could actually, as an individual homeowner, go to the Department of Natural Resources and ask for a permit to remove a town tree
In the right of way?
in the right of way. Yes.
Yes,
So at the Arboretum Committee's last meeting, and Jared Lee, you can certainly jump in here because you actually attended and I did not. The Arboretum Committee reviewed the most recent draft of that ordinance, and I had received some additional comments from Phil Normandy over the weekend. Those were sent to the town attorney today. But I think Stephen raises a very good issue, that it needs to be clearly defined what exactly constitutes a violation. And that's true of everything that's listed on attachment 1. Kayla, if I could just go ahead and answer the question about general codes work. So what general code was charged with doing, and I have been the staff person working with them, is they reviewed the charter and the code, and this goes back to sort of your original discussion of fines and penalties back in January. They identified areas where there are either conflicts within the town charter, which actually do exist, conflicts between the charter and the code, which currently do exist. And part of what they raised as a question and part of what brought this issue up earlier this year was simply saying, as part of the codification process, did you all want to review and update the fines? So they're not an advisory body. They're not going to tell you what these fines should be. That is a matter of policy discretion and kind of lies with you all. So this seemed to be an area where, as part of bringing the new version of the code, which essentially will rescind the existing code and you will adopt a new code, these seem to be fairly discrete items that could actually be accomplished. The discussion that you all had earlier this year when we were just talking about the codification process in general, is there seemed to be a desire, which is what we've intended to do, is that things that are more substantive, such as changing these provisions in sections of Chapter 7 dealing with tree-related matters, those would be essentially be adopted individually by ordinance to be more transparent. Anything that would change in the code through the codification process, and when that code comes back to you all for adoption, any areas that have changed would be flagged for members of the public as well as for you all. So as Kayla was stating, I think what we were hoping to do was to see if you were comfortable with the existing fines in the code, if you wanted to change them. That information would then, in theory, be relayed to general code for incorporation. If that's not what you wish to do, then certainly you could consider these all to be a separate ordinance. There would be obviously multiple sections of the code that would be impacted.
Do we need
So there's two ways to really accomplish what we're trying to do here.
So there's no vote. We are presenting this, right?
There is no vote tonight.
Right.
What is being asked of the mayor and town council is to provide feedback. It is entirely up to you as the elected officials to indicate that staff has missed the mark, that you feel that we are not being sufficiently punitive, or that we are being overly harsh. But we did want to make sure that in a public meeting, you had the opportunity to provide direction, to see the research about what other communities have on their books, and make a determination with as much information as staff can provide to you.
I would like to put in some feedback on a symbolic issue unique to Garrett Park, which is the nuclear-free zone. I just think that if we're gonna do that, let's really do it. I mean, if someone brings nuclear material into Garrett Park, let's fine them 10,000.
I will remind you that we do have a state law that sets limits on what we can have as our maximum fine. If you are concerned that we are not sufficiently harsh for nuclear-free zone, you do have the option as the elected body to direct staff to include a provision about assigning as well an imprisonment term. If you,
But we don't have an enforcement.
not currently, but the approach staff has taken is let's clean up the paperwork. So that once we do determine who's enforcing, their toolkit is polished and ready to go. So
Well, I would propose moving that then to $1,000 fine, up to 6 months in prison.
okay, that would move it from a municipal infraction to a misdemeanor,
Okay.
which you are entirely welcome to do. So let me make a note.
I mean,
Every,
This is
you
the
know
way it
that every
works.
one of us has nuclear material in their house.
Right,
in our
At least
microwave
this.
oven, is that the?
Smoke detectors,
right.
Americonium 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
But I don't think that this, I think that if you looked at nuclear free, you're not supposed to like possess nuclear weapons, make nuclear weapons, or discharge nuclear weapons. So I think that we're probably clean on that unless I'm wrong. Kayla may know.
I sincerely hope no one in the town of Garrett Park is making, distributing deploying or otherwise engaging with nuclear weapons while within town boundaries. There are locations outside of town that are better suited to that.
Any of our neighbors.
Just go across the tracks.
Not even the near neighbors. I believe there is a beautiful desert out west that potentially has some history with nuclear materials and would potentially be more appropriate.
So if you want to make it a misdemeanor, I have no problem because I think, and we can double check, but I believe that we don't have to worry about materials used for
Yeah.
safety and other purposes, similar purposes.
I'm just looking forward to seeing the nuclear cop walk around town.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's in the books, we might as well, respect that and update it, right?
And
could
that's
make
part
it
of why we brought this all back before council,
Okay.
because some of these were adopted many years ago and need a little polishing. So we're moving the nuclear free zone to a misdemeanor with associated imprisonment and maximum fine.
Category one.
Category 1.
No,
We-
no, not category
No.
1.
So to be
Misdemeanor.
clear, misdemeanors are,
Misdemeanors.
No category. Change
Okay.
the,
Okay.
change the.
so category
violation to-
Category 2, which includes such violations of code as issuing bad checks, issuing bad money orders, violating the solid waste and sanitary regulations of the town, as well as some streets and sidewalks, as well as Councilmember Bennett's pointing out earlier, preservation of trees and shrubbery. Obviously, a variety of different current fines in the books, ranging from $25, ranging from $50 for each bad check. We are suggesting that for tier 2, we move to a first offense of $250 and $500 as a fine for any repeats. As Councilmember Bennett noted earlier, we are calling for the preservation of trees and shrubbery to have its own distinct fine at $1,000 per incident. Is that set of potential fines and escalation something council is comfortable with? Should we be adjusting upwards, downwards?
The checks and money orders is checks and money orders to the government, is that right?
That is
Not
my
any
reading.
checks
And
I mean, is that specified in the ordinance?
Barb, I think you might be able to look at that a bit more easily than I could, but it is
Yeah.
my understanding that those two sections of the code specify if anyone issues a bad check or money order to the town, that's the penalty.
Yeah, they, both of these sections, so the one for checks specifically refers to no check for the expenditure of funds by a town official. Can be done unless there has to be a payee, there has to be an amount of payment on the check. We have to verify that the goods have been received. So the section 112 dealing with checks is really any municipal infraction would be upon the town official committing the offense. Similarly, in terms of section 112B, which has to do with money orders, it essentially bars any town official from purchasing or authorizing to be purchased a money order utilizing town funds. So these are not relevant or applicable to members of the general public. Both provisions are tied to actions of a designated town official.
Those are both probably really old. As in, I remember hearing that
yeah.
back. I remember hearing back in the, I guess, 80s at least. Maybe it was later than that. That it was really just a checkbook hanging around town office to send out.
Yeah,
things.
you're
Wasn't
right,
in the real
Stephen.
budget, so.
Yeah, whether
Probably
those are
fixed
even
then.
needed anymore.
Well, that's a policy determination for the
Correct.
universal rationalization of the code. The question is, in the context of addressing fines, do you want to leave it as a 2 or kick it down to a 1?
2 is fine with me. I mean, I
Alright.
think my concern is that we're creating a lot of time and effort and energy and potentially spending money on things that have never happened. You
Well,
know, it's like, why are we, but I guess getting it all cleaned up makes sense, but
Yeah, that's a larger,
enforcing it is another question,
that's a larger question, really.
right?
Well, I would assume at some point we may take another bite at this after we get the new codes, because what's in the new code that we approve may also drive some things like, I don't know about the trees and bushes, but if it's a small bush that gets run over, $1,000 for a small bush when you can replace it for $250 or something like that, it seems a bit excessive. Unless, of course, it's willfully done or whatever. But without reading some of these things like solid waste, I don't know if this fine is too low or too high. And there's some cases, for example, like section 603, vagrancy, or 602, indecent exposure. Well, I question whether or not the county covers those. And if it does, then it would seem calling the county police, unless they don't have jurisdiction, calling the county police would be cheaper or easier in all respects.
And
Well,
faster.
And faster, I
Again,
agree. We're not gonna have anybody
that's a
can do it.
question for the omnibus project, whether you retain this or not.
Right. Now the question, so for right now, I mean, we can leave it the way it is. I guess we'd have to look to see what we can retain and what we can give away.
Make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, Mayor Keller. You're saying we should be making another look at all of what the county has jurisdiction over versus we do, or
Which,
you're not?
which might be appropriate in the larger project of whether you want to even retain this provision in the town code.
Yeah, because I wonder if what we should do with noise violations too, whether that should be a county thing or us, and that's not even.
Now,
listed on here.
we opted out of the noise ordinance, and we've never enacted our own. Those are all policy issues associated with the project when you sit down and look at the code as a whole.
And at some point, we will do that with regard to these ordinances. In the meantime, it seems that escalating from where we were before, the current fine amount to the proposed amount seems very reasonable. Do people agree with that?
I agree with that.
Well, the one thing I gotta ask is, that would mean changing an ordinance, right?
The practical effect of what you would do tonight would be probably, Barb, correct me if I'm wrong, or Kayla, to direct the town attorney to do a proposed ordinance, which would be limited strictly to these sorts of housekeeping issues, to replace whatever current fine amount or current categorization under each of these provisions. And you'd get a fairly lengthy red line version, and you would adopt that, and it would implement these changes without respect to the underlying code provision
Okay, well, that makes
in
sense.
other respects.
That's why I was just trying to figure out the mechanism for it. So, okay.
Yeah, and Chris, probably what would happen is depending on what decisions you make tonight, and once again, this is not necessarily the way you have to do it. My initial thought would be to have general code incorporate the new fine amounts, and those, once again, would be redlined and highlighted when the new code comes before you for adoption. So it kind of accomplishes the same thing. The question is whether it's general code incorporates it into the things, or you want Ron to do a separate ordinance for all these matters.
Yeah, the only difference would be time. When is the general code project anticipated to be put before the council?
It should come up in the first quarter of 2025.
All right, then there are two policy decisions here for you to make. Number one being whether the staff proposals with respect to fine categorization and amounts, building on your tiering that you undertook last year or first of this year, are acceptable. And the second decision is whether they could just be incorporated in the general code revision that should be coming within a few months. Or you feel that the simple rationalization is important enough to do it as a separate undertaking.
My vote would be to do it all at the same time, since none of this is a problem, as far as I understand. Nobody's doing any of these things. So I would just make it all, clean it all up as part of the updating the code.
Okay.
Second.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's the
great.
sense of the
Thank you.
council that you convey that to, I'm sorry, what's the name of the contractor? again?
General code.
General code,
No nukes.
with the exception of section 609, which would, the violation type would be recategorized as a misdemeanor.
609?
There's no six-
There is.
Yeah.
nuclear.
Oh, it is
phase
up there.
Ye-
I'm sorry, it's out of
yes.
order.
Yeah.
That's what the problem is.
Yes, it was the last of the,
Misdemeanor and
Okay,
Forced labor on
Thank you,
Councilmember
yes.
Eisenstadt's property.
right.
So, question though, if this all gets rolled into that general code work, can we bring back up parking and other violations in that bigger suite? Kind of side by side with that.
Yes.
We should
Okay.
make that part of our agenda in January or February.
And one last question is, assuming we have that general code revision and includes this and then potentially includes things on parking, like what would that look like? How do we deliver that and how do we move that through town council meetings? Would it be like one giant black line of the town charter and code?
No, just the code.
Okay.
That's, am I correct, Barb, that under consideration at the moment is just the code?
Yes, that's correct. There are some issues in the charter that do need to be addressed, specifically the conflicts on, which is something we talked about last January, that there are conflicts within the charter itself about fines and penalties. So general code, while most of their work focused on the town code and the ordinances, they did flag some issues in the charter. Those obviously need to go through a much different process than the code, which is adopted by a 2-reading ordinance. So I can certainly flag those for you. And we can certainly schedule a discussion about parking as you all have requested.
Some of these, it seems to me, are kind of redundant. So like 607, 608, and 610 all have to, and 606. If some kid has a gun and shooting rabbits or squirrels, there would be infractions of all of those things, it seems to me. Is that what you want to do? I mean, is that the idea of it?
so
Well-
those were all established already in the code by prior councils who adopted the ordinance to create those penalties.
But my issue is if there's a kid who's, then they would be in violation of all those things. Is that right?
$3,000 for the
That's,
town council budget.
that potentially could be, but you could also have someone who's similar to a situation we had almost a year ago, had a firearm in a backpack and they were transversing through town. They're not firing, they're not shooting one of the protected
They're not just
animals.
swinging.
Part of the reason we have these as separate charges, that if we have a person who's only doing one of those things or only doing 2 of the 3,
Right.
that they can be appropriately captured. If you were to try and consolidate it into just one single penalty, you kind of run into the need to achieve bingo of, do you have all
Right.
components?
Okay, so that's the idea then.
That's the idea.
There's 3 or 4 infractions for one thing. Okay,
Again, if someone's doing
Right.
all of those things.
right.
I could very easily, I'm not a minor, but if I discharge a firearm in the middle of town, you would like the ability to
Yeah, definitely.
come after me and
Yeah. Okay,
Okay, keep in mind that these are just the titles of sections.
right.
They have no legal import. It's only the wording of the ordinance that does. And I think that the kind of policy question you raised, which is a valid one, is one that should be undertaken. First of all, we get the recommendations of our contractor, and then we consider it in the context of the omnibus. May say, look, you don't need these, they're redundant,
Okay.
or collapse them into one, or whatever.
Okay. So that's, yeah,
And-
not
and-
enforcement.
And
but
there may
just-
be policy considerations that have nothing to do with legal, but maybe historical
Okay,
elements.
okay. So let's make a motion and move forward.
Well, I don't think there's a.
I
motion
don't believe
necessary,
there's-
Just a sense of the
You just
council.
want to say this is fine with us?
Yes, part of the reason this came forward was that if you, as the elect body, had concerns, staff could find out. But it sounds like Town Manager Matthews and I have a pretty clear sense of what council would like to see come back and your comfort level with the proposed recommendations for these. So I appreciate you all giving this some time and consideration. And I would
So-
ask that we turn our attention to the
We
next matter.
We appreciate the work that went into it.
Yes,
It's always of particular interest to see what other municipalities are doing.
yes.
Although in this case, they're all over the board, so it isn't, may not be that much help, except to know that we're not going to be an outlier.
Yes, I will simply say the town of Kensington's schedule is one of the most comprehensive I have ever seen. I don't think a level of complexity like that is necessary and appropriate for Garrett Park, given the infrequent, if ever, need to enforce some of the provisions, but
I have a quick curiosity question. Since you were looking at some of those others, do they have a section in their ordinance where it shows anything you could be fined for altogether, or is it all kind of scattered throughout by subject like ours?
so a lot of them are scattered through subject, but they'll have language that says this will have a fee determined by council that may be periodically updated by resolution. And then there is a separate document, generally a resolution. In some communities, it will have not only fines and penalties, but also just general fees for certain services or permits. And that will be kind of one comprehensive document of prices and penalties for everything.
Thanks.
All right, so we appreciate your work on that. And the other thing that shows a lot of work is the updating of town's procurement procedures. Do you want to address that, please?
Absolutely. So before I get into the meat of the staff memo and the proposed ordinance that you have in front of you, I do want to call out that Mayor Keller requested that I bring to tonight's meeting a copy of the current, what we call contracting procedures for the town. You may recall seeing this before some time ago. It's the front and back of one single sheet of paper. And it does not address a number of situations that the town has found itself in. So while we have it here for reference, the proposed draft ordinance in front of you is far more robust at, I believe, 11 pages, and aims to integrate feedback that has been provided by this body at various meetings back in 2023. So as you may recall from those conversations, part of the reason that we have a procurement ordinance is to establish standards and safeguards so that we are being competitive in obtaining pricing, but that we are also being transparent, effective, and efficient as we handle town funds. So it is a lengthy document. I did try in the staff memo to summarize the changes and inclusions that you would see. One of the first modifications you would see would be to the section titled competitive bidding. This expands kind of what the protocol is when there is a project that would exceed the competitive bidding threshold. That competitive bidding threshold is established as part of the draft ordinance and set at $15,000. An additional section that we saw a modification is to sole source procurement. This adds a requirement that the town manager provide a written determination of why sole source procurement is the appropriate answer to the mayor and town council. That is meant to be, for transparency's sake, a record that others can refer to understand why certain decisions were made or recommended. You might notice in that section that they call out a number of potential situations in which a sole source contract is appropriate. That includes when there's only one supplier, when we need a specific manufacturer's product to maintain compatibility with existing equipment. Another area that is a modification of the current contracting procedures is assigning authority. In the kind of current contracting procedures, we do have language that says contracts may be signed by the following individuals: council member in charge of an area for contracts up to 50,000, mayor or the town administrator, so designated by the mayor for all contracts. That has run counter to how the town has conducted business over the past 20 or so years. And in the updated proposal, the signing authority is much clearer about who can be signing for what, and just keeps that focus that we don't have folks signing contracts they shouldn't be. We also created a lot of new provisions and sections. The largest one that I think was going to be most beneficial for the town long-term is the establishment of a definition section. This is a pretty robust part of the proposed ordinance, but it's important for making sure that everyone understands precisely what is being discussed, that it be included in there. One of the big things that was very important for folks in the conversations that happened throughout 2023 was having a definition of emergency that was very, very clear, particularly because when we are in a state of emergency and emergency procurement is an option, we really don't want that section to be abused. So looking at page 4 of attachment 3, which is the draft procurement ordinance, you'll see that emergency procurement means an occurrence or condition that creates an immediate and serious need for services, materials, or supplies that, 1, cannot be met through normal procurement methods, and 2, are required to avoid, mitigate, or remedy serious damage to public health, safety, welfare, or property. In the separate section that is talking about emergency procurement itself, not just defining emergency procurement, we have some pretty direct provisions about when the town can be doing emergency procurement. If we are subject to a state of emergency as declared by the federal government, state government, or Montgomery County, that would allow the town to do emergency procurement to mitigate whatever issue is being called. In the event that we have an emergency that is not impacting our neighbors or is not being recognized by any other government, we do have language that the town manager must get the approval of the mayor to issue a written declaration of emergency, and that such written declaration must be provided to the town council within 3 calendar days of the date of issuance. This is one of those sections that was a bit challenging to figure out how we wanted to approach, but given the repeated emphasis throughout public discussions about emergency procurement, we wanted to have something that was clear-cut enough.
Does that mean we can't do anything for 3 days?
No.
Oh, good.
So let's say we have
A fire.
a fire. Penn Place has unfortunately burned down. Town Manager Matthews, after consulting with Mayor Keller, if she receives Mayor Keller's approval, may issue a written declaration of emergency.
Right then and there.
Right then and there. Once that is issued, she can then move to procuring whatever we need to mitigate any safety issues caused by the charred remains of Penn Place. The 3-day provision is 3 calendar days. You all as town council must be notified by the town manager.
Okay.
There can't be any declaration of emergency and then council finds out at the
What if,
meeting.
just hypothetically, the town manager or the mayor isn't available, or both of them are not available for whatever reason? Let's say it happens, I don't know, it happens on a Sunday night. I don't know, for whatever reason, I mean, is there a, what's the procedure?
So if they're both unavailable, as the assistant town manager, I think I become the next person that has to
Is there
start.
Is there a chain of responsibility?
If the mayor's not available or out of town, he usually designates somebody to be the acting mayor.
Right.
So let's say Councilmember Eisenstadt, Barb is on vacation. She and Milton are enjoying Italy. Mayor Keller is traveling. You are acting mayor. I am the acting town manager. Penn Place burns down. The protocol then becomes, I need to get your approval to issue a written statement of emergency. I then need to provide that statement within 3 calendar days, obviously sooner is better, to your fellow council members so that we can continue. So because this is a procurement ordinance, the kind of chain of command and what happens in those situations generally be covered elsewhere in the town material.
So you can spend money without the town council's approval.
Only if it is a recognized emergency.
Right.
I can't just go to acting mayor Eisenstadt and say, hey, Penn Place is looking really ugly.
No, in terms of this,
Yeah.
emergency. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yes.
So, okay, I've got a bunch of questions when you're done.
Okay, I appreciate that. And we're kind of through it. Also, during prior town council discussions, the disposition of goods that were no longer meeting the town's needs was an area of concern. You'll notice in the provision that is now Article 2, Section 5, we do talk about how we can dispose of goods with an emphasis on trying to do so in a manner that is minimally harmful to the environment whenever possible and practical. We do our best to keep things out of the landfill. And there are some sites, including places like public surplus, that allow us to auction off items that are no longer meeting the town's needs, but potentially could meet the needs of others elsewhere. We don't specifically name that website, but that is one of the tools that we have used before. You'll notice one of the bigger sections is bonds and bid security. I do want to call out that overall, this entire draft procurement ordinance has been reviewed by the town attorney. It also had some review by the town engineer. The town attorney in particular tweaked some of the bonds and bid security section from the original draft to make sure that we were fully compliant with state law about what we can and can't charge as the appropriate bonds and bids. Town Manager Matthews is probably going to be better able to answer your questions about bonds and bid security, but those generally come into play for construction projects and other similar large-scale projects.
Are we introducing this tonight?
No, you are looking at it. If there are sections where you don't like the language, if there are things that you think need to be addressed that aren't currently addressed, you're looking at it now. Part of the reason we're having this conversation is that if we need to make refinements before we bring it forward for introduction, we can do so. So
Pre-introduction.
pre-introduction. You can't introduce someone you've never met. You can't introduce an ordinance you've never read. So we're kind of working through it. There is one significant area where we are anticipating that we will need the mayor and town council to weigh in on the language. Looking at the staff memo, you will see that Article 2, Section 1.3, contract modification, also known as change orders. That's our best attempt to create language that allows the town business to be conducted while still respecting that town council authorizes a contract, has responsibility for the budget, and wants to have language in place that is very clear about how a contract may be modified. So I'm going to read the proposed language aloud just so we have it for everyone present. It currently reads, every contract modification, change order, allowed under a contract with the town that is in excess of the original contract price shall be subject to prior approval by the town council after receiving a report from the town manager. Contract modifications, change orders that are less than 10% of the original contract price and are necessary to rectify health, safety, and/or project timeline issues may be authorized by the town manager after securing the approval of the mayor. In the event that the town manager is notified of an emergent threat to health or safety, and that such threat can be rectified with a change order, it is permissible for the town manager to authorize only such change orders as are necessary to mitigate the threat. Such action shall be reported to the mayor and town council within 3 calendar days.
Have there been any incidents of change orders that threaten the health or safety of the residents?
Town Manager Matthews, I'm going to let you answer that one.
Not during my tenure, Lisa. I think the language that Kayla was just kind of putting out there was trying to address a situation, for example, that we ran into with the road paving projects where we had streets that were milled up. Basically, we found the need for full depth patches, and the choice was either to move forward, which is, I texted you all, but that's what we did, or basically tell the contractor to stand down, take all their equipment, and basically try to call a special town council meeting. But in terms of specific, what I would consider to be a safety issue for a resident, I don't know that that really fits the bill. Kayla and I kind of went back and forth about that. Because it certainly would be more difficult for a police car, more difficult for an ambulance, but I don't know that we could say that was an emergent threat to a resident.
Okay. I mean, do you need any additional approval authority to just manage the cost of a project vis-a-vis change orders that don't really emerge to the threat of the health or safety of the residents or the staff?
It's a change, right? That you have the authority to make change orders,
In
in
excess
excess
of
of
10%.
10%. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as Kayla was saying, I think it's a balancing act. And a lot
Yeah.
comes down, it's trying to balance your understandable and legal role in the process with the budget and recognizing the practicalities during certain construction projects, where time literally becomes money if you tell a contractor that they're not able to work. Essentially, they're at a standstill. So that's the part I think we most wrestled with. Wouldn't you agree, Kayla? Not the,
So this is timely enough if you authorize a town manager and then get the approval of the mayor, that's quick enough for you to keep going? If it doesn't threaten the health and safety of anybody?
yes, I
Okay.
think so.
And to answer town
Sounds
managers,
good.
Okay, so we got some questions on that and a logic error on it. So the first thing is, to be easy, change order. Change order is actually a definition, and the definition does not agree with what you're proposing here. While I understand colloquially, the change order is a contract modification.
I can edit the language quite happily. Would you prefer it to read just simply change order without contract modification? Or would you?
I think it should be contract modification, because if you look in the front in your definitions, you call change order, and the change order is basically demanding, from what I understood, is demanding that the contractor do something
Outside of the scope of the.
outside of the scope, right? So I think it's a lot, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that it's kind of like a logic error, because you're saying change order, and then you say over here, change order. While I understand and agree, I think that dropping the words change order in this particular piece might be more clear, but if somebody else has.
And we can
Although-
absolutely do that.
But the word needs to, the phrase needs to be somewhere, because it's, your point is a good one, but yet colloquially, there needs to be a mention somewhere in this document of the change order. Even if
So
perhaps there needs to be a separate area for a change order.
Well,
As opposed
the
to
other
contract
option that I would
modification.
throw out to you all is if the definition of change order that I have in Article 1, Section 4
mhm.
doesn't work for you, we can change that. You
Yeah.
have the right to define change order however you wish in the way that makes most sense. So if we want change order to read a written modification to the contract that was previously approved, we can have change order defined as that for the purposes of our procurement.
And yeah, I think that would be a better way of doing it. To me, it's more
Okay.
clear, but obviously that definition came from somewhere, so I'm wondering.
So I
What we
went
might
through a
have-
lot of other municipalities procurement codes. Between this and the fines and penalties, I like to joke that I was doing everything but reading Garrett Park's code. I want to say that language we leaned on from the village of Chevy Chase, but that's not language that's used by every municipality. So this is part of why we bring it forward for council review and consideration. I can start looking at how other municipalities define it. I can reach out to Ron Bolt and talk about what he thinks would be a more appropriate definition to reflect council's issue.
Jolie's-
Mayor Keller, Councilmember Bennett has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jerry Lee?
I can wait until Phil is done with his questions.
Okay, good. Well, I got a couple here. So, if we go back, I'm just gonna go through them all. So Article 1, general scope, I'm sorry, administration, this is all on page 3.
Mhm.
I don't know if you want to change some wording because it says approval, all contracts involving. But then down here in the second sentence, you say any procurement. Wouldn't you want to say procurement or keep both of these the same?
Making sure that I'm following it. You are Article 1, Section 3. Your concern is that the first definition shall be approved by town council except emergency procurements. And
It's on section 3A approval, and you say all contracts. But then in the second sentence, you say any procurement. So I'm wondering,
so
contracts and procurements are two different things?
they can be. If you'd prefer that we have the consistent language be contracts, we can do that. Thank you for catching that one.
I would suggest that we do, just because it says consistent and it's consistent with some of the rest of this thing, so
Procurement's just a type of contract, right?
I would, well, it could be, I mean,
To your point, then if you just say contract, that should cover both, right? You're
Right.
covering either labor or material.
yes,
Okay. So I've got that note to modify.
okay. And on contract modification, I would adjust that based on whatever you come up with. Maybe it's gonna end up including the words change order, I don't know, but I would suggest we look at that.
And to be clear, you're talking the definition that is on page 4 of the. draft.
Page 4, under the definition contract modification.
All right, we can definitely do that. Thank you.
Okay, staying on page 4, responsible bidder. Do we want to put in something like disqualified for some type of disqualified for other reasons, if there's some other reason that we have? In other words, I know it's default on the payment of taxes, licenses, or other money due to town or state. But are there other reasons, which I thought that there could be? Like
One that
not
I've sometimes
filling it?
seen is poor performance or insufficient, whatever. I think that could be modified to read any person who is in default on the payments of taxes, licenses, or other monies, or who has otherwise
Not performed under the terms of the contract.
not performed under the terms of contract or to the town's standards, might be the language I include. There's every possibility, and I dealt with this more in Pennsylvania, that you can have a contractor who technically meets the letter of the contract, but the performance of work is shoddy.
Right.
So we can modify that. That might be a section that I run past Ron Bolt, just to make sure that whatever we're saying isn't going to get us into any trouble.
I would also, in one of these, and I know this has happened before, where the people don't fill out the entire form or they leave off information.
So that would be an incomplete bid. And generally, when we issue an RFP, we are clear that if you fail to complete all required elements of the bid, which is everything, we will eliminate your thing from consideration. The most recent one where I can think of where we had bidders who did not fully complete something include the trash RFP and the Yandell Park Design RFP. And that's kind of.
Okay, so thank you. If that's already in there, then it sounds like we're good. Page 5, contract modification, as we talked about before. I find, forgetting the change order part we already discussed, the other thing I had was, it talks about percentage, and I'm thinking that maybe it'd be better if it were dollar amount. And the reason for that is because if you look at a small contract, you know, that you put out there for $5,000, it's only $500 at 10%. And when it triggers this thing, versus saying we put it at 15,000, or was it $12,000? No, $15,000, right? $15,000. That's in line with what the town manager's authorized to do without having to come to town council, right? So if that's the case, why not make it the same here?
So based on previous conversations in 2023, there had not yet been a consensus of everyone being comfortable with setting it at a dollar figure. A percentage at the time seemed to be where the elected body's preferences lie. If that has changed and the folks here tonight would like to see that modified to say anything in excess of 15,000, we can absolutely do that. But I do think that needs to be something that each member of the group weighs in on.
Agreed?
Make sure I understand. That would be allow a change order, 10% or 15,000 as the max?
I think Councilmember Schultz is calling for eliminating the 10% and saying,
Up to.
Up to, anything below 15,000
mhm,
does not require separate, but anything above does.
That
Regardless
is-
of
You think
contract value.
10% of an expensive project, you want to have us direct say in that.
Right, because I mean, at a $500,000 project, we're talking $50,000. Conversely, if it's only like this 42,000 one we just approved, I mean, 10% is $4,200.
mhm.
And it's, we don't need to worry about $4,200. I mean, obviously we do, but you know what I mean? It's like, if the town manager has the authority to spend up to 15,000, it would make, to me, sense that approving a change order for $4,200 would be appropriate.
But not.
My
for
only question
42,000.
about that would be, cumulative change orders on the same contract. How would that be addressed?
If what? Jeremy, say it again?
So, I'm sorry, which page are we looking at? When
We are on
you're
page
reviewing?
5 of attachment 3. We are in Article 2, Section 1, subsection 3.
Okay, so, my question was, I think I'm generally, aligned with what Phil is suggesting. My only concern is that on a single contract, you could have cumulative change orders that could amount to quite a lot. And so I feel like in some places here, we have limit to changes over the course of a single fiscal year. So I just would want to make sure that we somehow put some parameters around it.
Very good point. Agreed.
So Councilmember Bennett, just to make sure that I'm tracking, you'd like to see language that, let's say, if a change order would be the second or subsequent change order to a contract, and the combined value of the previously approved change order with the pending change order would exceed 15,000, it then has to come to council. Would that address your concerns?
Cumulative
Yeah,
change.
something along
Yeah.
those lines. Like if we're saying that 15,000 is our limit, then you could maybe have two change orders of 5,000 each that don't need to come to council. But if the second change order puts you over the 15,000 or whatever amount we agree to, then it does need to go to that higher level of approval. Something along those lines is what I'm
You're
suggesting.
suggesting, Jerry Lee, maybe that then if it's going to hit that tripping point, then it would have to go to the next council meeting or a special meeting?
Yeah, it could be and I think that's the judgment of the town manager of how much time is available to.
I
To
kind of
make
like that because I think there was a surprising amount of change orders that never saw the light of day on the SRTS contract, and I'd like to avoid ever having that happen again.
Okay. Town Manager Matthews, do you have any thoughts or concerns about having language regarding a cumulative change order? I want to make sure that
No,
we're getting your
I think,
perspective.
I think that would be customary. I was just trying to flip through a code of someplace I used to work, but I wasn't finding it as quickly. Like I say, in most circumstances, I have no concerns whatsoever about trying to pull together, either waiting to the next regular meeting. I think particularly with town hall looming, just some consideration needs to be given to active construction and how we are, between Chris and I, how we are to deal with issues where actually stopping work would actually cost the city more money. So I'm not really sure how to balance those things. But I do understand the concern that you all are raising.
That might be something that after I start drafting language and potentially speaking with Ron Bolt, get special attention when we bring this back forward. Or
Would be
might
my
be an email.
suggestion, Kayla. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Councilmember Schultz,
Okay, now also along that, I don't know if you want to do this or not, but just as a quick side note, I don't know if you want to put an escalation clause in so we don't have to revisit this thing every so often. In other words, we could use some government, rate of inflation to boost the 15 or whatever we decide on up.
what I might do rather than rate of inflation, in a prior jurisdiction I worked for, one of the things that was annually done by the council there was issuing a new resolution that adjusted upwards, rarely downwards, anything that they needed to adjust in terms of fines, penalties, procurement. So it might be something where I include language that says council may periodically via resolution modify this.
That would work.
That would be kind of,
I just wanted to make sure that we don't have to go through the whole ordinance procedure again just to bump something up due to inflation. So that sounds like it should work.
I wonder if even if there's a way to do it, or if it would help to have. Well, I think it would help to have something where whenever there's a new mayor term started, that this would be brought up and either resolved to stay as it is or adjusted at that point. So at least it's just on the table and everyone knows. We had problems before where contracting procedures weren't recognized.
yeah, I don't know if it would make sense to include it within the draft ordinance, or if that would make more sense for that to be a direction provided to staff by council of, as part of the standard business practice in May, whenever there's a new mayor coming on board, in addition to administering the oath of office, we also put forward on that meeting a periodic review and potential update of
Mhm.
the resolution that sets the limits.
Maybe not even just a new mayor term, not even even if it's the same mayor, it might be
Mhm.
things have changed financially or not, just so it
And-
doesn't get to be.
I think to have
a
that
decade old.
flexibility to bring it back potentially more times. I mean, we could potentially have a new mayoral term, but then also have some sort of massive financial drastically altering situation. I think back
Oh,
to
yeah,
none of us
yeah.
could really predict COVID. In order to preserve the flexibility to bring it back multiple times,
Yeah.
I would prefer that be just a practice that the town council has staff enact rather than embedding it into this draft ordinance.
I guess we're talking about similar things. I'm suggesting have a minimum of at least the minimum of looking at it every 2 years, even if it doesn't change for a while. I'm not saying to do a maximum where you can't.
No, no,
Can't do it
no,
outside that window.
I follow that. I'm thinking of how we handled the personnel manual where we have
Mhm.
it scheduled for
Okay.
kind of an annual review and flagging of issues.
Okay.
And that is not, I don't recall that being embedded in the personnel manual. That was a direction to staff, if I recall correctly. Town Manager Matthews, thoughts about how to approach this?
Kayla, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the dollar values that are in here, well, not the change order part, but the 15,000 is tied to a provision of state law, correct?
Yes, that provision is talking about kind of the minimum threshold for when things have to be publicly bid out.
I mean,
So-
I think we could, I mean, I'm not sure if the state looks at its statutes any more often than most municipalities do. One option would be to tie it to whatever the state does
And I think
as an escalator.
in some portions of this, Ron did inject language that tied it to whatever the state standard is.
Yeah.
So as long as we have some protection to keep it from being archaic, the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
that's exactly what I'm looking for. And to maybe make it somewhat automatic so we don't have to go through a lot of work.
Yeah.
It just is done.
I think that's going to be a question and conversation for me to have with Ron Bolt about how he would suggest we phrase it so that we have that kind of protection from, as you said, it becoming archaic.
Mhm.
But I do appreciate you kind of flagging that as an area of concern.
Thank you. Next thing is right to reject. This is item or subpart 5 down here.
Mhm.
Do we need to add in rebid, or in other words, reissue the bid, or doesn't it matter? That you have the right to reject all bids, proposals, or offer, but we should also have the right to rebid it, right? Or does that come along? I don't know.
So we have every right to reject reissuing the RFP because
Yeah.
we didn't get appropriate responses. We can explicitly say that if we want to. We are never legally obligated to award. We can, as the municipality, always decline to not move forward with a project if we get back a bunch of terrible bids and just say, forget even putting it back out in 6 months. We're done.
Okay, I mean, we'll leave it, we can leave it alone
Yeah.
unless Ron or somebody else thinks that we should leave it in there.
That section, I don't think concerned Ron, but I will double check with him and just say that council wants to make sure we are preserving all of our rights and freedoms as a municipality to do whatever we need to do.
Right, that would work. On section 2, competitive bidding and proposals, part 1D, bid acceptance and evaluation. Bids shall be unconditionally accepted without alteration and correction except as authorized in this article.
We can modify that. I think I know where your concern
It's-
is.
Yeah, it's,
So unconditionally accepted for review and evaluation.
there we go. I like that idea.
Let me just jot down what I said there before you take us to the next one, please.
And then we're gonna go over to override bid requirements.
Mhm.
This gets back to something I mentioned earlier about changing the ordinance, because if you override the bid requirement, I would think if it's in an ordinance, you would be required to update the ordinance. I'm not really sure how this works unless it's a single case, or what are we talking about?
My reading of this and my writing of this was understanding to be a single case of, let's say there's something undeniably quirky about town hall. If town council feels it is appropriate, it may choose to override the requirements about competitive bidding to ensure that we get potentially a general contractor who specializes in historic municipal buildings. My understanding is that it would not be overriding permanently forever, just in that one single case. I can clarify with Ron about how he read and interpreted that. This was not a section that he expressed any concern about. As I mentioned in the staff memo portion of this, where there were concerns, he's not afraid of track changes.
I mean, there's two things. One is that we're overriding a requirement in an ordinance, which, not being a lawyer, I scratching my head as to whether or not we can do that, because if we enacted an ordinance and if we have to change an ordinance by 2 readings, two of the ordinance, I would think overriding an ordinance can't be done by a resolution, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. It just sounds like a logic here to me.
I will confirm with him, but I do really think it is meant to be a temporary one project exclusive override and not permanently throw the ordinance out.
Right.
And I'm also not a lawyer, so I think we flagged that section. I think waiting to hear back from Ron Bolt
Yeah.
about his concerns is going to be the most productive.
Yes, definitely. It's just that, there's 2 parts of it. One is that if it's a single case, that makes sense and it should be stated as such. But then the second part is, if we're overriding a part of an ordinance, can we do that? That's the second piece of it. Okay.
Well, as long as we're on that, I'd be interested to know what good cause is.
I think
Yep.
that
Seems
is
to
one
me
of
it
those.
Sort of begs the question.
Yeah, I will ask Ron how he interprets good cause. I suspect that is language that you see in procurement codes meant to try and cover unpredictable situations. I think back to COVID and how many unprecedented situations we have all found ourselves in. But I will confirm that with him. Councilmember Schultz, do you still have?
Got a couple more. So sole source procurement,
Mhm.
part two, very end. Should we add, there's two reasons why you've defined two reasons why we would want a sole source, which makes sense. But I'm wondering, should there be another one that says when it's in the town's best interest?
That is a
Or-
common provision, and I can absolutely add when it's in the town's best
But
interest.
who decides if it's in the town's best interest? The town council?
So sole source calls for the town manager to provide in writing a determination of why sole source is appropriate. If, in town manager Matthews' opinion and judgment, it is in the town's best interest to not bid out a contract and to award to a sole source, the language currently calls for her having to provide
So the
in
town
writing to,
manager says,
Yeah.
decide, or puts forth the reason for it's
Yeah.
in the town's best interest.
and that creates a record of what factors were
And
considered
then
at
the
the,
town council decides if they approve it or not.
yeah.
Okay.
The town council?
How
So
do we
sole
approve it?
source,
Sure.
depending on the dollar figure, let's say we have a $100,000 sole source contract to rebuild the shed out at Penn Place. I don't know why I seem to fixate on burning down Penn Place, but it's getting a workout tonight. Barb would do what she's done for other contracts tonight. She'd bring forward a staff memo saying, I don't have multiple bids for you to consider. The reason why I don't have multiple bids for you to consider is that is a specialized municipal shed. We feel it would be in the town's best interest to not compete it out with people who've potentially never built a municipal shed. And that is why I'm recommending that you award his contract. Town council retains, as always, the right to question that, the right to say, we don't want to award to this individual. We want to direct staff to put it out for bid.
So do you think we should add in the,
So I
Also-
might change it
Kayla.
to,
May I jump in here a minute?
Mhm.
Because I think this is part of the issue I had with the current guidelines, and a sole source procurement is exactly that. And I think the classic case that will come up, and Kayla and I have both worked in other municipalities with police departments, is your police radios. If you're part of the county system, such as Tacoma Park was, then you had a very specific type of radio used by your municipal police officers because you were also part of a broader 911 system, for example. So I think we need to be careful about saying, what is a sole source procurement? I think the section, Phil, that we were just talking about, that you had raised about overriding bid requirements. And I think, Kayla, I might have been the one who led you down the primrose path on that one, because I think that language came from Westminster. It was added after I left. It was perhaps a clumsy attempt to address, Phil, where I think you're going, which is if something is deemed to be by the town council to be in the town's best interest, not to go through a competitive procurement. And I think good cause needs to be defined. The town council defining something as being in the town's best interest, in my experience, doesn't mean that's a sole source procurement. That simply means that the town council is reserving the right as the legislative body to say that there are circumstances where competitive procurement may not be in the town's best interest. But I guess I just want to be clear, that's not a sole source procurement. So I think if you're trying to get to that idea of retaining some level of control to recognize specific circumstances, I just wouldn't do it under sole source procurement. I'm not sure where to suggest you put it, because I think the language that we just talked about overriding bid requirements, was an attempt to leave you all with that discretion. Kayla, does that resonate with kind of as we were working through this?
it does resonate. What I think, without having language to try and find a home for, it's a little
Yeah.
challenging to figure out where it should go.
Yes.
But if this is a concern of council, which it sounds like it is, in the near future, we can come back with a revised version of this draft ordinance that has more explicit language to address this in whatever home makes sense when I'm sitting with Word open and rearranging things. But I
Sure.
don't think finding a home for it tonight's on the table.
No, that's fine. I wanted to go to the next one, which is emergency procurement. And I wanted to know, should we add in here where it says that may authorize, it's notwithstanding any other provision of this article, town manager may make or authorize others to make emergency procurement of supplies, construction items. Should it be on applicable? In other words, it's one thing if you have COVID and you need to buy a bunch of masks or contract with somebody to do COVID testing or whatever, or something like that. But to say I'm going to use emergency procurement to redo the roads at the same time, I'm just wondering about somebody in the future possibly abusing this.
I think we could potentially include language similar to may make or authorize others to make emergency procurement of supplies, services, or constructions items relevant to said emergency.
That would work. That's
So-
really where I was trying to go. So that would work.
Okay.
On number 4A,
Okay.
and this hopefully is, the first part's gonna be easier. We talk about provided by, it's this second line, it's the end of the sentence, and it says provided by other state or local governments. How about, do we include federal, or do we not normally work with federal for these type of things?
I don't think I have ever seen a municipality write a federal contract. Barb, are you aware of any?
No, I have not either, Kayla.
Okay.
They're just working on an entirely different scale that's really hard for us to make
Yeah.
relevant.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. And then I'm not 100% sure about how we would figure out, for instance, at the end, it talks about if the town manager finds the cost of the items to be purchased is equal to or less than that which would be obtained by competitive procurement. So how does one make that determination?
I think it depends on what you're trying to purchase. And I think part of that depends on how recently you purchased a similar product. What I would almost suggest for this section is that we just strike everything after other state or local governments or agencies and just cut it off there.
Just
Uh,
through competitive procurement or procedures or services to be performed.
So we're looking at cooperative procurement. You, I think, have scrolled slightly down. We are up here in
Yeah.
this provision, subsection A. So what I would suggest, if that is concerned logistically about how we determine the pricing as compared to bidding, let's just cut it out. It's your
Sounds
draft.
good. I like that. So right after the word agencies, we strike everything
Yep.
else. That makes perfect sense.
How does this interact with 1A? This seems more straightforward. 1A of the same section requires a comparison of the purchasing policies of the entity on whom we're trying to piggyback. It requires a lot more paperwork on the part of the town manager. Are they redundant, or are they intended to address different instances of piggybacking?
When I started looking at other codes and trying to pull together something that is Garrett Parky and able to meet the town's needs, I did come at it from the approach of these are addressing kind of different angles. We can cut section 4A if you're concerned that it's redundant with section 1A or subsection 1A, I should say. Sorry about.
No, I think 4A gives us, or well, it gives the town manager more flexibility.
And I think it's a determination for you all as the elected body. If you want the flexibility of 4A, I can cut 1A or
My question was, were they intended to address different things?
Yeah,
Or
Kayla, I
are they,
think.
are they in practical effect redundant?
Town
Yeah.
Manager Matthews, I'm going to tap you in to let you.
Yeah, I understand the confusion because I'm looking at it myself and obviously I've read this numerous times. I think in some cases you have, I can think of some of our electricity contracts, for example, and it is sort of a cooperative of nonprofits and, I mean, it's through Pepco, but who the actual supplier is. That is sort of, in my mind, almost the essence of cooperative purchasing because it's facilitated by, it's a cooperative purchase by nonprofits and governmental entities who are all working together. So in my mind, that's more the definition of cooperative purchasing. You also see that through, for example, the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments. The member agencies will sometimes do cooperative purchasing. I kind of interpret, and I'm not sure I'm correct with this, but 1A as being what we did, for example, for the pickup trucks for our maintenance staff, where we basically have either ridden a state contract or a Baltimore County contract. So to me, the truck example is more 1A and our electric power purchase provider is more
Mhm.
cooperative purchasing, if that makes sense.
I'm tracking what you're saying, but I would almost suggest is that I retitle 1A instead of being purchase at bid price,
Mm-hmm.
do it authority to ride other jurisdictions contract.
I
Because
think
that's
that might help,
how we've
Kayla.
always referred to it of.
Yeah.
We want to ride it. So let me make that note.
I think it looks like one of them is set up, the cooperative purchasing is set up to work with other agencies to buy stuff, whereas the first one, purchase at bid price, is like you just mentioned, Barb, where you say, okay, Baltimore County's buying them at this amount of money, so I'd like to buy one of those on the same amount.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Kayla's suggestion perhaps to maybe, as I said, we
Mhm.
kind of usually use the term, it's either we're writing someone's contract, we're piggybacking on someone's contract. So perhaps just changing the title might help.
Let's start with there. As I go through
Yeah.
it and make some of these other edits, I can potentially start redlining things to see if I create clarity and council can look at it and see if that has alleviated their concerns.
And as an FYI, I did notice up here that it says federal and purchase at bid price whenever federal, state, or local, so maybe we should include federal wherever we're talking about multiple agencies
Well,
on the
that's
off
just
chance.
the declaration of state of emergency, isn't it?
No,
No.
we are not in that section.
Okay, sorry.
We're on section 3, exemptions from competitive procurement on page 6.
Just an observation that we're about a half hour behind.
Yeah,
I don't know, for some of us, it's final exam grading tonight.
I mean, I
Yeah.
can bring up the rest of this stuff. We're introducing today, right? Do
We are not introducing tonight.
Okay, it's just for
Can
discussion.
we wrap it up in a few more minutes?
Yeah, I've, a couple of them I can just send you guys. They're like type, one of them's definitely a typo.
Darn it.
Under methods of disposal, the words at the second to last line, the words say exceed $1,000 and then $5,000 is written
Oh,
versus $5,000.
that's a typo. Why don't we, Councilmember Schulp, if you have a few minutes after this meeting concludes,
Yeah.
that way I
let's
can
do
just get
that.
it from you all tonight and then
That-
we can address Councilmember Eisenstadt.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's all good.
That's fine.
Can I
Yeah.
add one that I think is important to me, just in general? That may already be in there. I'd like to have something, I know, like Barb, as a rule, when you have a contract for something, even if it's under this number, you typically will talk about it in your town manager report. Is there a way we
Mhm.
could make that mandatory in here? Because I think I wouldn't want to see something repeated where like someone might want to say, I'm going to, do 3 contracts for 14,900 for something I want. I don't think I would get approval for, and have it kind of fly under the radar. Is there a way to have that kind of become a very clear requirement that any contract like this would be just recorded at least there?
I think I can add a subsection that basically says disclosure of contracts
Okay.
signed by.
That'd be great, yeah. Just something where it's
Councilmember
routine.
Bennett, I know you had some questions and concerns, and I also recognize that you are not with us in the room tonight. So if you wanted to kind of share your questions and concerns at this point.
Sure. So I just had 2 areas where, they're more general comments. One, I feel like throughout the document, the role of the mayor and the town manager are a little muddled and unclear. So I just think it would be good for perhaps offline, Barb and Chris to talk through what the mayor's role really should be and look for opportunities throughout the document to make it more clear what the mayor's role is, as distinguished from the town manager.
Sure, be happy to do that.
And then the other thing is, I feel like I'd like to revisit the procurement of professional services. That's under section 4 on page 7. I've been on council now for 5 years, and I've never seen our professional services for certain areas be competitively bid or any kind of process disclosed as to how they were bid originally, how often they might be re-upped. And so I just think that we should actually put a little more effort into that section, because that's a lot of money that the town puts out every single year to, for example, the town engineer, the town attorney, even the town arborist. The current arborist is fabulous. Love him. Does a great job for the town, and I think very cost effective. But at some point, we'll need to re-procure those services. And I think that there should be some cycle of competitive bids for these professional services. I don't think we should just leave it up to some negotiation of the town manager.
That's a great point.
We can definitely have a conversation and bring this back with beefed up language. I'd want a chance to kind of talk through some options for how to phrase it with Town Manager Matthews. So that might not be something to get
I mean, there
into.
is something valuable about working with somebody who has a history and has some, understanding of what goes on in the town, and not put it out for bid and take a lower bidder who's starting from a new and doesn't know anything.
Absolutely. And I'm not suggesting we completely throw out this section, but I do think there ought to be some sort of cycle. There ought to be a little bit more of a competitive process, and it doesn't have to mean we take a low bidder. I just think that right now it's completely separated out as a completely different process than all of our other procurements, and yet it can be over time a large dollar amount.
I definitely appreciate those concerns, and I'm
Maybe
happy
a
to talk.
cycle of 3 or 5 years, something like that.
We can definitely try and include language about cycling. Barb, this might turn into you and I going back through some other jurisdictions and how they handle the timeline of that. So
Yeah, we can certainly do that. I think,
I mean, the same professional service can win the bid, but it's also nice that they know that there are bids, right? So that it keeps
Yeah.
everyone a little more honest, right?
I can definitely appreciate that. And I think Jerry is correct that there's room to expand and beef it up without completely throwing out what we have there. But I also recognize that making sure we have the appropriate language is going to take some time. And I want to make sure that if there are other concerns throughout the document from Councilmember Bennett or anyone else here tonight, that we also touch on those. You will see this in another draft form. This is going to be an ongoing.
Yeah,
And introduce and then adopt too. So
But maybe
Yeah, and Phil
next-
covered a couple of things I thought about, and I agree with Stephen's point as well. So that's all I had.
Okay.
Could you change the changes so that we?
I
go through
can
those
definitely
next time?
change the changes once I start making the changes. So look forward to that even more robust document in the near future.
Oh, boy.
Hey, we got by with 2 pages for
All
a
right.
really long time.
Are there any other questions or issues that wish to be raised? So the bottom line here is being returned to staff for changes consistent with the discussion this evening. Forward again. And I gathered, I mean, this all started in 2023, and I've tried not to insert myself in things that had a history before my election, but I gather that the policy determinations of dispensing with the relative informality and flexibility of the procurement guidelines that existed before, that decision has already been made. You want to go with an ordinance that does not provide for contract renewals, for example, that requires competitive bidding on every contract over $15,000. All right, so it'll be returned to us.
Is there, implicit in your statement, is there, I hear between the lines a statement that the old flexibility may actually be better. Is that a fair
No, I think,
interpretation of your view?
a lot has changed. And I think this was actually last modified in 2010, but whenever it was, times have changed, everything's more complex. The one thing that hasn't changed is we're still a small town. We have exactly the same population we did 10, 20 years ago. Virtually the same number of homes. Our needs, certainly some of the procedures surrounding the satisfaction of the town's needs have changed over time, but the needs haven't really changed that much. And we're substituting a page and a half of material with 10 pages of code, which will have, just as you discussed an hour ago, fines and penalties for infractions. It introduces a lot more formality and rigidity to the whole process. And probably time as well, given the number of written findings that need to be made and reviewed by the council and so on and so forth. As I say, I have assumed that those were policy considerations that were considered when the initial determinations to formalize this were made in 23, and the staff has certainly done a lot of work in pursuit of that. I think it bears going to the next stage that you've indicated of a modified proposal for a ordinance, but my view of it has been in the context of a larger policy question of, is this level of complexity and formality and rigidity necessary in a town of 1,000 souls?
I think there are 2 sides to the coin, and I will remind council that you may at any point in time direct staff to cease pursuing this.
Sure.
If there are sections from the existing procurement guidelines that you feel need to be integrated into the draft, we can do that. I know Mayor Keller referenced contract renewals, which it was remiss of me to not address those in the draft proposal. So expect to see some language about that when I bring the next version forward, if council wishes to have me continue to pursue this.
Sure.
I think part of the original 2023 conversations centered heavily around a recognition that for transparency, for consistency, and for a level playing field, council felt that beefing up some of the requirements was going to be the best way to make sure that we have some guardrails. But as the conversation tonight here reflects, we want guardrails, but we also want to preserve council's flexibility to award, not award, or make whatever decision they believe is in the best interest of the town. So
I wonder if there's not like a middle ground for it. Like, it seems like it's a little too loose to have something that's large text on just like a page and a half, but maybe too much for 6 pages. But I think some of this was in reaction, or maybe all of it was in reaction to, there was a situation years back where there was a mayor who would state that she didn't plan to honor this and spent, I think it was like $90,000 on a sole source or something. So it was kind of, there was
Well-
nothing the council could do after it was done. So I feel like recognize that it's like a small town, but it's kind of more comforting if we can have some sort of guardrails without going overboard. So, you know, something like that couldn't happen again. Maybe that's the disclosure part to just say then that, you know, that might be enough to slow things down if something's untoward.
And that's definitely something to consider. I think everyone here tonight is going to continue to think on what we've discussed, to think on points raised by their peers. And I think we have the potential to potentially, as Councilmember Paskowski said, find something that's a middle ground, a bit more rigid than what we currently have in place, but perhaps not as rigid as this initial draft. I'll remind you all, that's part of why we chose to approach it in this process, so that we had time to make sure that whatever was going forward met Garrett Park's needs. So I appreciate all your time and thoughts tonight. I definitely have some revisions to make. And as you go about your business over the next days and weeks, if there are other things you think of, please don't hesitate to call, stop in, drop me an email and tell me, upon further consideration, Kayla, I'd like to see language about this.
How about the disadvantaged businesses? That might be language we're keeping.
That could definitely be language worth keeping. We might want to beef up the meaning of disadvantaged business, just so we're clear. The state has a couple of different classifications of disadvantaged and minority businesses, which might be helpful. So that'll be my next phase of research.
Thank you. And thank you, Phil, for your line-by-line review.
Sorry it took so
I will
long.
confess that I did not have the same stamina. And is there any new business? I will defer my remarks under town updates, which leads us, Phil, back to you on archives.
I'll try and make this quick. For as far as archives goes, Sonia's still working on town minutes reconciliation with just over 2/3 of the records reconciled. We're still doing oral interviews for MP3 transcribing, so eventually we'll end up with the written version of a lot of these, and that's been a bit difficult at times because some of the recordings weren't so great or some of the voices were fairly weak. And she updated the account to reflect a new featured collection and item, the Women's Club collection and transcribed minutes. We did have one person who came in, which she didn't know who this person was, but they came in for 3 visits totaling 6 hours for the purpose of accessing materials about the Chisholm property in court case. Well, see, Chisholm, I don't know which house it was, but the
No,
one,
it was across the tracks.
the oil sighting was, I was
The
thinking
oil
across
and-
the tracks.
oil and coal or whatever it was. It was subsequently purchased by the county, I think. Well, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I understand. I don't know quite where this person is going. But my understanding, yeah, it was basically of the former Chisholm property that was across the tracks. There was a house, there was siding for coal and eventually oil. And then when they went out of business, all that stuff, when, you know, the county purchased it. So I'm not really sure what that thing was, what they were up to. Then another thing that we talked about, well, actually, before I get off of that, Chris, I was gonna, you were saying that you think it's just the oil sighting that you're.
Oh, no, I don't. I was just going to say that the property was eventually purchased by the county and added to the Waverly Schuylkill Park. Why an individual would want to research it, we obviously complete speculation. If the concern was that it took staff time to accommodate that request, we're sort of caught between the rock and a hard place on the Public Records Act. As long as we retain that material, even though it's technically irrelevant to the corporate municipality, if we retain it, I think, well, but what was the concern? Was the concern that this had taken a lot of,
It
The
took a lot of
archives.
time. It was basically, it was 6 hours of time,
you know,
although it was over 3 visits that were, I assume, averaged 2
Yeah.
hours apiece.
at some point, if a person is simply asking for certain kinds of provision of certain records, we can begin to charge them. But,
Okay.
we'd need to look hard at there's an Attorney General guidebook on administration of the Public Records Act, and I think Public Information Act, we'd need to look at that.
Is there any
Isn't
requirement?
that
to
why
speak
we
into the
hired
record?
the Jeanette's position? Isn't she supposed to be our records management expert?
So Jeanette is working more with the current and active records. Sonia's working with the records that are no longer being actively used, but may periodically come up as a reference. If that's something that we want to adjust, that might be a conversation in closed session. Barb, I'm not sure kind of where that would fall. But Mayor Keller is correct that we do have state guidelines about how much free research time someone can get if they submit a Public Information Act request for information. We've encountered it recently where someone we estimated would need about 6 or 7 hours of research for something. The first 2 hours are free, at which point we can then provide them, here's an estimated bill of staff time to do all of this. I think the question becomes, if Sonia's down in the archives, and part of the reason we have her scheduled the way we do is that she is available to people who are potentially working 9 to 5. What value do we see in someone doing research versus potentially not submitting a formal PIA request, but still taking up time? Town Manager Matthews, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be helpful, and I'm still in touch with Claire from time to time. You know, to the best of my knowledge, we've never treated any type of work done by the archivist dealing with town historical records in the same vein as we would a Public Information Act request. You know, if someone files a request for records under the Public Information Act request, as Kayla indicated, by state law, we're required to give them 2 hours of time anyway. Not knowing more of the specifics about who came in. I mean, I think you all certainly could elect to provide guidance for the archives and say that the most work that she will do for any one request is 2 hours and make it similar to a Public Information Act request. That's probably a subject for another night, but we could certainly treat them the same, but for how the request gets originated, because obviously there's a very specific framework and timelines under state law for actual request under the Public Information Act, but we could certainly set some limits if that's something you want to do. But maybe as a starting point, I might reach out to Claire and find out if she ever encountered a situation similar to this where someone came in multiple times.
Sounds good to me. The last thing was that, as far as outreach, Sonia updated the display exhibit to feature Paul Edlin, who was former mayor and World War II vet, got shot down, lost an arm. He wrote a book also about it. It's pretty interesting. So it's a nice exhibit. So take a look if you haven't already. That's it for me. Thanks.
And the exhibit has a really neat technology gizmo there that is not always working, but when it is, it's fascinating.
It's, yeah, so she did a digital frame, but the problem is, and this is something I was gonna float by Barb, but since I'll since you kind of brought it up. So two things. First of all, we're looking at getting a new display case, but the other thing was the possibility of trying to get a plug located near there or put down some of that stuff over the top. You know, there's a ramp like thing you can put down over the top of a wire.
Okay,
And to allow, somehow we'd like to be able to have the ability to have 110 volt over there so you could plug in a power pack for, say, this digital device or some other
Okay.
lights in the case. So,
yeah, I can talk to George about that.
yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, be happy to.
Okay.
Okay. On the 18th of this month, we have a meeting scheduled with Greg Wiedemann with respect to trying to refine and narrow the plans, particularly with reference to so-called option 4 of the restoration and rebuilding of Town Hall. Stephen has been the most active individual in that for, as he points out, 7 years. And would like to discuss that further. I hope our efforts, it seems to me, over the next 2 weeks, 10 days, whatever it is, should be to give as much thought as we can individually and collectively to the approach that evening so that we can make it an efficient and productive session.
That's exactly what this was towards, or the idea this was towards. Some of it, I'm sure, we're spending on town hall relative to the rest of the needs the town may have in the immediate and long-term future. But I'll just point out one thing just about the budget. I think it will be helpful to talk about it with Greg on the 18th. And I put a lot of this together in the hopes that council members could think about it between now and the 18th. And if you have any questions, just feel free to hit me up. It's it came out.
I don't think
It
it's
was,
in the
it
package.
was laid on the table.
It's on-
Oh,
it's on-
Yeah.
okay, okay. Thank you.
Yes, unfortunately, the package got prepped early and did not have Councilmember Paskowski's
Great,
thoughts.
we'll look at it.
It's right
Yeah.
here.
Anything else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So my suggestion would be that the $600 per square foot, it seemed like it was coming out like, I think the main recommendation for Greg Wiedemann would be break things into distinct buckets so he can kind of say, we have a certain scope for this historic building. Let's figure out exactly how that's going to be accomplished and what that might be costing. And then look at that separately from any addition that's in the back. And then have the third thing, which I think was causing a lot of confusion around folks around town. They were trying to divide like the total cost of the project by just the like the square foot of the building, which is really an erroneous way to do it. You really should separate out what the cost of the site around the building is. So I'm suggesting those three things. I'm pretty sure Wiedemann's going to agree. You may or may not agree with my suggested budgets of $600 a square foot for old and new, but I felt like 600 wasn't a shocker for here, but it's a big shocker for in the back. It's about as simple as you can get for commercial construction to do a wood frame community center. So I think that might be a thing to kind of help guide him.
So is the company that they use to give us the estimates gonna use those buckets? Because when you get a bid from a contractor, they're not gonna bid it that way, obviously. They're gonna bid the whole, carpentry as one, roofing as
Yeah,
one.
but you could still have your bid breakdown have those buckets within it where it would have historic, new, and outside, and it'll come up to a grand total. All you need to have is like some subheadings in between. But I think it'll help them kind of isolate what will be the budget, like how much we're going to spend on, say, insulation here versus in the back, and but might be some things we want to compromise on in the back, but not in
Does
here.
Greg Wiedemann know how to estimate costs?
No,
He has a
he
consultant,
may,
yeah.
but my understanding is that our effort on the 18th is to achieve a far greater level of refinement and detail on option 4, such that it could be estimated with greater precision than that $3 million one that was looking at a far less detailed
So we're gonna go
scope
to
of work.
working drawings.
I think it would be a little less than
It's in-
working
yeah, in between
drawings, but
working
more
drawings.
than what we
50% or
have now.
something.
Yeah, like one of the big things that he's missing is any kind of a narrative about what's going to happen with all the siding on this building, what's going to happen with the ceiling. And so the estimator, without that kind of information, he's making a lot of just educated guesses and a lot of square foot costs, where a lot of those things we're not going to have a whole lot of options or, you know, really reason to change from something. Makes a lot of sense, like maybe how to insulate that wall. So it might be good to kind of like lock those things in early, so that way he could get,
And we're gonna
Yeah.
keep these windows, or what are we doing with the windows?
that's part of what they're gonna have to say is what would happen. Are you replacing those, or are you gonna keep them, and why or why not? And what's the
Right.
difference in the cost? But the more of those kind of variables that could be locked down, you would be able to kind of say, hey, it should be much easier to kind of like know what you've got for the bigger pie. If you can say, hey, this is exactly what we're gonna do with the historic building, which is the most important part of the project. You know, and figure out how you can massage money around the rest of it. So
The warming kitchen is in, the handicap bathrooms are in, so it's that, what your plan is, but just in different pots.
well,
It-
they had option 4, and I guess a springboard from that is something I'll just throw out as food for thought with Greg and his team when we see him. Is like before we were asking him to focus on the area that's really where the addition sits now, and I'm curious if maybe that wasn't a big cost driver, is trying to do that. Like you're tearing down an addition attached to an 1890s building, you're trying to put another one back on, you're doing a 3-sided foundation. I think it would be simpler if you built like a design, like a simple square or simple rectangular building that's pushed back off the historic addition and had a lighter connection to it. It may or may not save a lot of money, but I think it would.
This would be analogous to what was done at Penn Place.
So we're still thinking about doing the crawl space underneath, like some storage, but not an elevator and not a full basement.
That'd be part of what he's looking at. But then there's a diagram on the back of this that kind of shows that
Yeah.
idea. There's a hatch in the back that shows a simple rectangle, and that might be able to house a lot of the main function back there. Whereas the other hatched part that goes between the existing building and that new part would,
Right.
that would be, you got to have a connection. You're not going to walk outside of one building and go to the other.
Is that the warming kitchen?
Well, he would design it and show us what would fit in there the best. I
Yeah.
think the best thing would be to have more of like a food layout space in
Right.
there. Possibly a ramp that comes back up, which is something we explored before, possibly a ramp that comes back up to the stage here.
Right.
A side benefit that's shown on there is labeled number 6. So I'm pretty strongly guessing that back wall is not the original configuration. There probably was some windows or something else in there, so that some sort of a scheme like this might allow more daylight back there if the community desires it. But that would be the kind of thing where he could look at a lot of those things and, you know, with the estimator and with his engineering consultants, decide do they feel like these are going to be good money savers or quality improvers for the project, and then, you know, come back. I'm basically suggesting like don't restrict them to carrying on with option 4, which we were trying to do that to save costs by staying on the existing foundation. If we're not going to do that, then just release that requirement is what I'm suggesting.
So just to clarify, there was a discussion last time about keeping the foundation, but now we're.
No,
We decided last meeting to build it all new.
It's not a
So,
good
Yeah.
idea.
All new, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's right. Okay, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Excuse me, yeah.
And then
Okay.
to help guide it, I think the other thing that I was expecting they were going to do this when they did the project. I'm surprised that they didn't, but I think we need to ask them to do it now, is to really assess a program. And that's what's on this page, like this boring looking Excel thing. And I can highlight kind of the big movers of how this kind of a document works. It's looking at net square feet of spaces. So like this room here, 700 square feet. That stage, I can't remember what it was. It's 162. But all those
Yeah.
things, they add up to, you know, if you take off the front addition and the back addition, you end up with like 1,245 square feet of space you can stand on. Then there's the space that makes the walls that surround all that. There's the space of like this chimney back here. When you add all that in, the outside shell is 1355. So that's a pretty key number. If we're going to go through the effort to take off the front and the back addition, I think that 1355, we're banking that that's going to be part of what we have. But then if you look at it from the other direction, the key number might be that there's a 2595 that's down there. It says max
Right.
gross square foot. So that Wiedemann had pointed out before that the size of this lot means you can't, in the county zoning, you can't use the base percentage for a lot. There's a sliding scale. There's slight complication with that, but it comes out to it's about 2,595 square feet of building footprint that you can have on
Including
this
the
lot.
setbacks.
Well, the setbacks are different. The
Yeah.
setbacks decide where you can put that 2595,
Right,
but
that's
the
number.
2595 is the max
Right.
number. That's under the assumption that then that's more than what the town allows. Like the town can allow like a tighter percentage,
Right.
not a looser one. So this would be allowing or assuming going with the looser base county recommendation or county requirement. If this body decided that was prudent, I think that would have to be done at some point. But that 2595 minus the 1355 that you would like, we're not going to tear. I think it was 1240 that we could have as gross space in the new addition. So I think,
1245.
yeah. So I started laying out like what I was hearing, and some of these things we have to have. We need 2 bathrooms, and the smallest you can make was 50 square feet. There's a warming pantry. Greg was noting before. There's a restriction on percentage of that relative to the whole building. So some of those things are all kind of set. Others are suggestion, like the foyer extension would be like basically a nicer, newer version of the room we have back here with the ugly table that we put food on.
Does Wiedemann have this?
Not yet.
No.
They're gonna get it before the meeting?
I assume so, but I wanted to get this all in all of your hands and have it out for anybody from the town if they have comment or additions to it or differences in thoughts. So that way we can kind of jumpstart that conversation with Wiedemann so he can hit the ground running a little bit. So if you have more thoughts on it now or later, feel free to hit me up. And I guess,
Well,
yeah, and then,
preferably now, because I'd
Yeah.
like to get it in his hand.
yeah,
If we do it tomorrow, that's still only a week, a little over.
True.
I find the essentially the third and fourth, they aren't numbered, but the third and fourth pages, very helpful, very useful just in organizing my own thoughts, and I think they would be useful to Wiedemann.
And telling them the budget of what we're targeting, I think would help them a lot too.
I would not put a cap budget on. I'd say we absolutely need to bring it down from 3 million. We have a little over 2 million in hand. And let's aim in terms of what we talk about and ask him to do next week, aim for reducing that, but not put a hard dollar cap.
Okay.
And then have it priced, and then we will have firmer figures, because at the upper end, we're dealing with that $3 million figure that, for reasons that Barb has articulated far better than I can, are not absolutely reliable. We feel that there's a certain amount of slush in there,
They're
and
definitely.
the way to flush it out, refine further down the line with what we want.
You're not gonna really know until you get working drawings and put it out to bid. I'm sorry, but that's.
We understand that, but
But at least
Yeah.
we're moving in the right
Yeah.
direction.
you'll get it down within 10%. Like by the time you get it there, then you knock out that last probably 10-ish% of contingency when you get to the working drawings. But yeah, once it goes to that next stage, if he starts really saying like what are all these walls, what's happening with all these walls, what's happening with all those walls, what exactly is that ceiling, and we'd have the opportunity to kind of challenge some things. I'm not sure if we need a lot of the architectural embellishments he was putting on the back. So those would be the kind of things we could really look at to see what we can do. And I wasn't suggesting like a budget cap, but like a more of a target. And I think that's
Target,
usually
right.
the kind of thing is, shoot for that. If you can get halfway there, at least then you're in the ballpark, and then we'll start making it amenable. But I think within the program, I think big ones that would be important for all of us to weigh is to look at that program. And I'm suggesting 400 square feet for the accessory room. I'm just not sure if doing something like in option C, I think he had, Wiedemann had like 230 or something like that on the drawings, 230 square feet, which is basically the size of a largish bedroom.
Yeah.
It's smaller than this piano room next to us. And I'm just not sure if that works for the purposes that we're talking about. So I think that'd be important for all of us to think about and to be able to relay to Greg. But I think that balances out with like storage. I think, Chris, you've been trying
Yeah,
to research.
I've been obsessed with that.
Yeah.
For purposes of the next step and sending this to Greg, because I find this very helpful. If we could get a sense of the council now that we would like to send this to Greg with a cover email explaining some of the things we've sort of agreed upon informally, which is aiming to reduce architectural embellishment, particularly on the back, the specific example being the gables, and so on, and giving both a general and a specific notion.
Can we
So
not
that-
do the crawl space at all and just put the back part on a foundation and just not have anything underneath? Can we put the HVAC like a different kind of system that we don't need a real unit down there?
Yes, for the HVAC, but
Yeah.
that's probably a good question to ask him for everything
Yeah.
else. If you can put it on slab, because he may have concern about in cold weather, you get thermal kind of like the cold goes into the concrete and it could make the concrete feel cold. There are ways to get around it, but
Right.
he may decide, or may decide to look at it and see if it's more economical to build a crawl space that you can kind of marginally heat and then get access to your pipes, or go ahead and build it with slab.
Right.
Just weigh the pros and cons.
So, to the bigger question of whether to send this out, I mean, we're not saying this is the final plan, but we're saying this is the sort of
That we've,
our iterated thinking, right?
that we've
Based
we've
on-
used this to try to organize our own thinking.
Yeah,
and-
that's a
and
great
therefore,
idea.
yeah.
I mean, we're not committing, I mean, we're using it as a good starting point with
Yeah.
a lot of questions. We're not committing to it anything firmly yet. We're just sending this out,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, and he wouldn't follow all these numbers exactly. He'd be trying to make it all work. And usually by the time you get around one function to get to another, then you end up getting a little bit more space. So it's a matter of maximizing the efficiency of all these spaces to get as much as they possibly can. But I was trying to get in there what I was hearing of what the community seemed to be wanting, which having that accessory room, obviously the things we had to have, like the
And that's
warming kitchen.
400 square feet?
That was just a suggested number, so
No,
if we
it's
see
just-
something
Does
different.
the council agree that we should send this out tomorrow? I would say we should. Does anybody object?
Oh, I
to
say
that?
no.
Phil, do you have any thoughts?
No, I'm fine with sending this
Okay.
out. I mean, because it's not the
I-
end all be all, it's a good suggestion as to where we want to go.
Barb, do you have any thoughts?
Geraldine?
Oops. Actually, I was already in the process of sending an email to Greg with the document attached, because I think he certainly should have it in hand. I had already told him, talked to him after the November meeting, letting him know that you all were interested in ideas that they would have to scale back the cost of option 4, and had shared with him the comments that had been made at the last meeting about the rear addition and wanting it to be nice, but not needing a lot of architectural embellishment. So I do expect that Greg and Lindsay Field, who some of you have met before, should be coming to the meeting prepared with some ideas that they have of how option 4 could be reduced in cost. So as I said, there doesn't seem to be any disagreement about my sending the document, Stephen's document, to Greg. So if that is in fact the consensus, I'll just finish it up and hit send.
Is Geraldine in the consensus? I mean, consensus means.
I would say, like, I would send Stephen's document as Stephen's document
Mhm.
and separately send the commentary that Chris pointed out about the architectural embellishment, et cetera.
Yeah, and I had
That way you
actually,
don't have to create a new document that merges the two.
no, and I think I had already, after the November meeting, said that there had been some discussion about removing the gables and things like that. So that's already I guess, on their plate, and so I can just go ahead and just remind them of that discussion as part of this exchange.
One thing I would say is that we consider not even mentioning option 4 because we've kind of changed the calculus on this whole thing insofar as we decided, which I agree with, that we build a separate rectangular or square building with a attachment to allow people, you know, some type of pass through to allow people to walk between the buildings and or use it for food layout. Similar to what Stevens put out there. So what I think is that maybe we really shouldn't mention option 4 because we don't want them to necessarily try and build to option 4, but to use this, especially the rear building, as a blank slate to build what we're asking, but without the constraints of option 4 itself.
Maybe we should key off this sketch as
Yeah.
option 1.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
Ish.
yeah,
Ish.
ish. I was being sloppy in using option 4 as much as I did. I think that's a better formulation, Phil. And Barbara, I ask that it just be, I've just spoken with Stephen about this, just the third and fourth pages of his most recent circulation.
I agree. The first two pages are really
Not the
more
budget
for
page.
internal to
Yeah.
town
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
that stuff is more useful. The other two pages are useful for him and his team to move forward.
Well, I think we should tell them something about the target budget or what we're looking to reduce, because I think otherwise we're not gonna be as cost effective as we need to be to have this project move forward. So I would at least give them some kind of range or target or some kind of overall budget target that we're looking for, so he knows what we're talking about.
I just don't think
Fair point.
we can do that at this point at 10:30 on Monday night.
We might get
My-
there just by.
my
having-
My understanding of the discussion you wanted to have with Greg was also intended to be interactive, so I don't think in the next week they're going to have entirely new plans, and it seems like some of you are not necessarily on the same page.
No, I don't think so either, but at least we should give them some kind of a
It seems like
idea about where we're trying to get, because I think if we had $3 million, we wouldn't be coming back with this new proposal. I mean, we're really trying to reduce the scope and the price of this project so that it meets the kind of resources that we have available.
it's
Because
not
Chris
certain.
doesn't want to do a bond offering, and
Yeah.
this is all the money that we've got to do this.
It seems that we are coming to the same page, right? I mean, in terms of costs, in terms of scale.
Yeah,
does
but
it
we don't
not?
know if we have a
Yeah.
project that
Kind of, it may get there just naturally by having them in the next phase really spell out what's all intended and have that on the page so the estimators can really estimate to that versus guesswork. Because one of the things that they may be doing, the estimators with a project like this is saying, hey, this is for a town that's for, you know, who knows what kind of wishes could come out of the, you know, their pocket later on. So they're probably holding money in there a little bit, just a lot of contingency for that. So if
I
we
think there's a
advance
huge
them-
amount of contingency in the budget that company Axios or whatever it was
Yeah, I think
did.
so too.
But, you know, I still think that, I think it would be good to give Wiedemann an idea about what our target is, or what our budget, what we got available for this project.
Can we just say 2 million to 2.5 million?
If you're convinced that well, I think we have a little more than 2 million right now. You have the carryover from last year, which we haven't addressed. We typically do in the mid-year,
The carryover,
yes,
yeah.
not the carryover, the unexpended balance.
So that's about it,
So
right?
I would be reluctant to say anything beyond, it needs to be substantially less than 3 million.
Okay.
We're gonna
Agreed.
have more time anyway, right? With
And,
this will come in. so.
and that's not shorthand for, oh, we can always raid all the other projects. I think we will have the ability to finance something in excess of 2 million, considerably less than 3 million. And I'm unwilling to say, and that figure is, 2.45
2.5 million,
or,
right.
or
Okay.
2.3 or whatever.
If you don't want to, we're not
No.
gonna make you.
Well, you can make me, actually.
No.
I have no vote.
We can
But
have our
I just think that
No.
that's going to be a more productive approach.
Okay.
I mean, if they ask, we might think of how to say that to them. I mean, I guess you just want to be, I guess it's a negotiating tactic. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we done? Did you want to talk about the zoning?
No, that can wait. I don't think it's going anywhere in the next 6 weeks, so
Okay.
we'll cover that later. Is there any other business?
I hate to do this. I missed my opportunity with new business. What is our schedule for the budget planning? For FY 20?
Well,
2025 budget?
in the ordinary course of events, budget planning for next budget year?
Yes, for the mid-year budget review and then for the development of the FY 26 budget. What is our schedule?
Well, the usual schedule in the last few years has had it introduced in April, a work session prior to that, and a vote in May. Ideally, I would like to advance that by 1 month. Next
So
year, as every odd numbered year, there will be 3 council members. In the old days, we thought it was a concession, a help if those people didn't have to, 1 hour after being sworn in, vote on a budget they had no role in preparation, assuming any one or more of those are new. But acknowledging that we have a lot on our plate, short term, and that there's always and always has been difficulty in getting some of the external figures that are necessary for preparation of a budget on the revenue side, it may not be possible to advance that by a whole month. Sorry, long answer to your question. Other things being equal, we would certainly do no worse than what has been the case in recent years of a work session in February or March, introduction in April, vote in May.
Okay.
Is that what you were inquiring about, Jerry Lee?
Yeah, at which council meeting will we review the mid-year budget adjustment?
Well, there again, we would like to have it sooner rather than later. Otherwise, you're doing a mid-year budget adjustment and turning immediately to the following year's fiscal year's budget.
Okay, so
I
I assume
think-
that means we'll be doing it in January?
I think given the extraordinary items that are currently before us, the necessity to obligate ARPA funds and to not lose momentum on a revived effort to deal with town hall, it may be February.
February 2025?
Yes, for mid-year budget adjustments for
Okay.
fiscal year 25.
Okay.
That's 2 cycles, right? You would have to introduce
Yeah.
in February, then approve in March.
The mid-year point is December 31.
Right.
We should do it in January.
Okay.
Whether we will be able to do so or not is a question. What I'm implicitly saying here is, I doubt that we'll be able to do it that quickly.
Okay.
As I think was the case last year, you didn't deal with mid-year budget adjustments until March or April. March.
Yeah, I feel
Is
like
that
we
the
rolled
time
it.
that we could allocate more funds if we wanted to the town
Yes,
hall?
yes.
Okay.
I
That
mean,
makes sense.
conceptually, you can do it right now. Just look at the figures.
Yeah, but
But
that's the
formally,
right time to do it.
reassigning them, yes.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
Well,
Shirley done?
just before, Jerry Lee, did you have anything else?
No, no, it's just helpful to understand what you're envisioning for that process. Thank you.
Okay. Barb, was there anything else from your end?
No, nothing. Thank you though for checking.
All right. Having heard a motion to adjourn and a second, we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.